Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of the Florida Sound Archive podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Kaiser. And for today's episode, I have on with me a very special guest. I'm pleased to welcome in Matt Sweeting. You may know Matt for a lot of the different bands he's played with over the years. He's still very active as well. Some of the bands that may come to mind are Strikeforce Diablo, Assholeparade, Tired From Now On, and there's so many others. But Matt is here to tell a story. Hey, Matt, welcome in. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Good to have you on. Finally, I know we've been looking forward to this episode because it's important to document your story and talk about your journey and all the things that you've done because you've been involved in so many bands and you've also had your hand in other parts of the scene, especially in Gainesville. So I want to go back to the earliest beginnings. So we're going to time travel and we're going to go back to your origin story, where you grew up. So tell us, where in parts of Florida are you from?
Yeah, so I was born in Miami. I was born at Doctors Hospital in April of 74. Doctors Hospital is down by UM. It's not there anymore, but born there. Grew up there first 18 years. Really what a fun place to live in the late 70s, early 80s. We when I was very young, we lived kind of more in the South Miami area, and then my parents split up, and we really kind of settled in Kendall because it was just my mom, and my grandmother lived right off of like 81st Avenue and Kendall Drive, so like kind of by Dadelands, if you're familiar with that part of Miami, right? Like close to US 1, that kind of thing. My grandmother had moved to Miami in the 50s and from the Midwest, and they like built that house in, I don't know, 58. And so, we moved in, I think it's 76. I was 2. We moved in with my grandmother, and I lived there until I was in 6th grade. And then we moved like deeper into Kendall out by Miami-Dade South. So like 117th and Kendall Drive, that area.
And as you were growing up in this early, very formidable period of your life, do you have any memories of music at that time?
Yes, some fond ones. Like so, again, I grew up with my mom and my grandmother essentially, and my sister. I have an older sister, but my parents had split, and my dad wasn't in my life at all. And then my grandfather on my mother's side passed away like a couple months after my dad left. So there's just me and a bunch of ladies, and like music. My grandmother had a piano in the garage. She used to play piano really well, but by the time I was really conscious, she didn't really play that much. My mom also used to play piano, but she didn't really play much, but it was there. And nobody in the house, like, no, I always thought this was interesting. No house that I ever lived in with my family ever had a stereo. Like, there was never music playing. There was never like, no one put something on, for example. There was never records around that weren't mine. When we were in the car, we would hear stuff. I'm sure my mom listened to music. It just was never a priority. And my grandmother, the same thing. Like, sure, my grandmother would she was a member of the Elks Lodge right down in South Miami, and she would go there and they'd have music and stuff. But it wasn't really until when I was like 5, my mom got me, I can't remember if it was Christmas or my birthday. I think it was Christmas because I think my sister and I both kind of got them. I got one of those like Fisher Price record players, and it was like, so it's like a white, I remember it so vividly. It's this little white record player, and it had these 2 like bubble speakers. So this is like 79 or something. And my mom just I don't know. I think she just got inspired. She's at JCPenney's or whatever, and she got me. So the first couple records that I had were these. I still have them because I'm a hoarder on some level. They were like the top of the pop kind of collections, right? So like it would be Radioactive or Full Tilt or, stuff like that. And it would be, like Donna Summer or like the theme song from Greatest American Hero or like whatever. And I would listen to them over and over. And then the first record that my mom got me that like I listened to obsessively was the Grease soundtrack. I loved it. Like I think she got it for my sister. And I remember like hearing it, and then for whatever reason, it just resonated with me. And I was like, I want that. Right. And so like I stole it from her, and it's still one of my, it just, in terms of nostalgia, that soundtrack still has a place lives rent free in my head.
Sure. I can understand that. I think we all have something like that we
Yeah.
think fondly back on for those reasons.
Yeah.
And as you were growing up and getting a little older, entering high school and starting to learn about new things, new music, new styles, and what have you, talk about that period for you. How did you grow at that point?
Well, like when I started to get more serious with music, I think two things happened. One, when I was in sixth grade, there was a movie that was really popular, at least in my little universe, called Better Off Dead. It's like a John Cusack movie. I just thought it was the coolest movie of all time. I thought he's what I thought like a protagonist should be, right? That's kind of how I saw myself going through life, right? Kind of always on the short side of things. And his character in the movie, if you remember, when he's on his date with the exchange student, he like serenades her with a saxophone. And I wanted that to be me so badly. And so I pestered my mom to get me a saxophone. Like, I really want to play the saxophone. And I think for all the right reasons, mostly because she didn't want to live with someone learning to play a horned instrument, she ended up getting me a guitar instead. Like a little, one of those like department store, things. And so that's how I started playing. I was so disappointed initially, but it ended up, I guess, being a good thing. But that's how I started to play music, because she got me a guitar for like Christmas of that year. And that got me interested in like playing music. My mom, she worked a lot. She's single mom, hustling. And, she had no help. The only family we really had was my grandmother. So it wasn't like, there wasn't a lot of assistance. Like, not to say we weren't doing fine, but she didn't have a lot of free time. So we weren't like going out watching shows and stuff, but every once in a while. And I just always remember, and actually like right before that Christmas, my sister's 3 years older than me. And my sister convinced my mom to take us to a concert. It was my first like big concert. And the band was fine. It was just, the whole thing was like, seemed so like magical, like, so it was the fall of '86. So it was, the headlining band was Aha, the pop band. And then, the band General Public was the opening band. And it was at the Sunrise Musical Theater. So it was like a really far drive for us, but the band was so popular at the time. I just remember being like so amazed at just the spectacle of it. And it always stuck with me that like, this is so cool. Right. Sure. And then my sister, like, again, because I was younger than her and my mom worked a lot, like she worked weekends and she would take trips for her job and stuff. And she worked at Jackson Memorial Hospital. So she just was like busy a lot. And so my sister would have to look after me quite a bit. So like there was a period after that where I saw a lot of music because her boyfriend wanted to take her to a show, but they would have to bring me. So like they took me to see Pink Floyd at the Orange Bowl, '87. They blew the pig up and all that stuff. That's the first time I ever like smelled weed. I just remember being there. He was definitely smoking, and like everyone around, I was just like, what? I don't know what's
How
happening.
old were you around this time?
So I'm like 12, right?
Okay,
13,
sure.
and then like they took me, my sister and her boyfriend. The first time I ever saw people having sex, they took me to see Yes at the Sportatorium because they wanted to go. And if you ever went to the Sportatorium, it didn't like have seats per se. Like part of it did, but like, we always got shitty seats. And so they were like these plastic chairs that'd be like zip tied together. Like that was the Sporto. And I remember for whatever reason, Yes had they didn't have an opening band, or at least we missed them if they did. They played Popeye cartoons, which I was stoked on. And when they came out, like everybody kind of rushed to the front and everybody started standing up and stuff. And so the row behind us was completely empty, right? Like way towards the back. And these two people just started fucking on the chairs. And I remember turning around and my sister's like, pointing my head, no, look back there. Don't. I'm like, what are they doing? Like, what are they, So like, I just, the kind of spectacle of the live thing, I thought it was just always so exciting, regardless of the music.
Sure.
That kind of exchange was always so, I don't know, to me, it seemed like so alive,
Right. I can see that.
Yeah. And then in terms of like punk music or underground culture, one of the things that my mom would do when we were younger was because, single mom, always kind of hustling, doing stuff, she would save up all year to send us to sleepaway camp because she was like, I want a break, right? Like it's funny. One thing that happens if you stay kind of in relation with your parents, like when you get older, you see things from a different perspective because you have a different relationship. When I was young, I thought she was doing it for me and for my sister, but it's funny now. She's like, "Oh, that was for me."
Right.
I
No doubt about it.
Get you out of this house. Like, anyway, the sleepaway camp that we went to, we went for a couple years, and it was in North Carolina, and they had a program where they would bring kids over from Europe and they would be the counselors and they got like a free trip out of it. Right. And so it was like the summer of '87. Right. And my counselor was from England and he was this guy, Ian. He just seemed like the coolest person that I had ever met. And he gave me my first like punk tapes, like dubbed them for me and was like, you should get into this. Like just check this out, see what happens.
Do you remember
like,
some of the bands that he?
Oh yeah, I still have them. You kidding me? Like I've thought about framing them,
Wow.
So he gave me 4 tapes, and it Cramps, Bad Music for Bad People, Sex Pistols, Nevermind the Bollocks, Agent Orange, Living in Darkness, and REM's Dead Letter Office, which is like one of their like singles collectively just come out. And it wasn't that the music resonated with me initially. It was that he gave them to me. Just, like older, he was like in his early 20s and I was 13 and thought he was the coolest person on the planet. He had an accent, he was like from some magical place. Like we had never left. We didn't do much traveling or anything like that. So meeting someone from England was pretty exciting to me. And so
it also opened the doors in so many ways for you musically, because before that may have happened, these were bands that were not on your radar.
Fuck no. No, I didn't. Like I had pretty like mainstream tastes even after that. Like it took a while to really start to like footprint out, but like, when I was like in 6th, 7th grade, my best friend was from Argentina and his family had this like obsessive like relationship with Kiss. because they were like wildly popular in South America, like to the point where like they would put like Alive 2 on in the living room and the fucking grandma sing, right? Like everybody's into it. So I liked Kiss and like a lot of that kind of like rock, like metal, right? I was super into it, and like just we kind of really, he and I really got into it. And then I got those tapes and I had them and I really liked them. And I had my first tape player was one of those like square, the squares with the, so I'd sit in my room with the square thing, but like wasn't really ready to, I wasn't allowed to play tapes in the car, right? Obviously my mom wasn't going for that. And so, and a lot of my friends at the time didn't really, it wasn't really their thing. They wanted to stick in the mainstream. So I just stayed in that world, right, for a couple more years, because I was into it, and I was into it because they were into it. And again, like the live thing was just so exciting. So, after the first couple of things with my sister, I started to kind of branch out, and like she dropped me off at the Sporto to see Iron Maiden,
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that was killer. My mom took me to see the Monsters of Rock tour. Rod was my buddy. And so we went to see Van Halen's Monsters of Rock at the Orange Bowl in '88. That was killer. So I got to see Metallica. That was definitely like, I had never heard of them at the time. And I just remember that they were like the cool band on the tour. It was like, what is this? Like, holy cow. Like the sun's going down in the Orange Bowl and suddenly everybody has a leather jacket, and it's like they just absolutely destroyed. It was fucking awesome. Right. And like, so just still doing that stuff. And actually so they were so good. We went and saw them again at the James L. Knight Center, like 6 months later. That was killer. But like, it definitely was still, it took me a while to kind of get more into like the underground side of things.
Sure. I was curious about that because a lot of the bands and venues you've mentioned at this point, these are
huge.
Larger scale, right? And rightfully so. They're bringing in these larger touring bands who draw that type of crowd and what have you. But as you're starting to discover more of this local scene, what was that for you? Do you remember some of those initial bands or places that you first learned about?
Yeah. So like, with that guy, with my buddy Rod, like he also played music. And so not only were we going to shows, but we started playing together, that was like my first like attempt at playing in a band. And like instantly it was like, to me, instantly it was the coolest thing ever. Like I've been playing guitar, I don't know, since that mid '80s, and I'm still not very good, but I absolutely love playing in a band. I never aspired to be like a musician. I never cared about like proficiency, it just was never like I was never an obsessive like that, but I would have band practice every day. I loved that kind of energy. So Rod and I had this band, and we played like the middle school talent show, that kind of thing. And we played like, Ozzy cover, Iron Maiden cover. It was, that kind of stuff terribly, but like in our minds, we were killing it. But when I lived in that house in Kendall, right off by Dadeland, one street over, like neighborhood kids, right? Like even younger. So like, 5, 6 years before all of this stuff that we're touching on, one of the kids that lived on like the next street over that I was friends with, his name was Jason Myers. So Jason also played music, skateboarding, but instead of like Iron Maiden and Metallica, he was like Circle Jerks and Use It Today and 7 Seconds and all that kind of stuff. And he started playing in bands, and I had started to hear that he was in bands that were like local band, like actual bands, not playing at the talent show, but playing at like a house party and stuff. And so around like ended that summer before ninth grade. So ninth grade's still middle school, right? Like he was in a band. He was in a band called Homesick Abortion, and so I went and we saw them, and it was like so primitive, like especially in context to the music that I had been going to see, like as you were saying, like spectacle, large, and the but the way that they had a song called "I Hate Basketball," and it was just like you know it's just exactly what you want it to be, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever. I just was like, I can't believe this is real, that kind of thing. So Jason ended up being in a couple other bands. So like he played the last couple shows with Powerhouse. He played in the first iteration of Beyond Reason, and like a lot of that kind of stuff. And so that's kind of, we're moving now a little bit more into like some other stuff. And really like the first like bigger like punk experience I had was that Haven Center show, right? Like it was in Kendall, like the biggest deal ever. I mean, to me, living out there, and that was like the end of '89. And like, so many bands played that to me was like, the universe opening, because it was like all the local bands I thought were amazing. I'm sure they weren't, but
Who do
to
you
me,
remember? Who do you remember fondly that played that show?
oh, dude. I mean, Believers played. First time I saw Quit. Beyond Reason played. Indecision played, who we'll talk about in a minute. And Powerhouse played. And the best was Fwa. And Fwa was like kind of older than all of those other bands. Like those other bands were more like my age or a little bit older than me. But Uncle Jesse's like old, right? Like, I mean, I'm sure he was 5 years older than me, but in my mind, he was like, he was like James Hetfield. And they played, and the Haven Center tried to shut him down, like make Swa stop, because the show was going too long and it was starting to get rowdy. And Uncle Jesse like pushed him down, took a swing at him, and it was the coolest thing that I had ever seen. And so Fwa definitely became like superheroes to me, because it was like, dude, they just took out the venue. Like this is the coolest band of all time. And so, and like still, yeah, the Power Lines LP is sick to me. That's like the first local record that I ever heard was that, like Band of White, right? Like that song, very similar to I Hate Basketball, right? But a little more graphic. But it's that was the shit, still is, I'm
Sure.
sure, on some level. But and the fact that they were from that area, they were from Kendall, that was when I first felt like pride. Like all the bands were great, right?
Sure.
Super great. But like that, they were like the first like, holy shit kind of band. So after that show, I got way more into like the punk side of things, pulled out my tapes again, like, put my Iron Maiden tapes away, right? Put like even Metallica to the side, and was like, I'm missing something here, right? And so Indecision was one of the bands that played the Haven Center show, and Bill Clower, who went on to be in Radon, he was in Indecision, and Mike Maribel, who went on to be in Beyond Reason and a bunch of other bands, he was the bass player in Indecision. And Mike and I became like really good friends, like right around like after that, but like in that era. And like I turned 16 in April of 1990, and that kind of really unlocked things for me. And like I didn't really have a lot of friends that would drive me places, maybe drop me off, but not get me home. And then I'm kind of screwed, right? So like getting a car was like, that really unlocked things. And Mike was kind of my wingman, because he couldn't drive, but he knew everybody, right? And so through him, I got to find out about shows, go to shows, like that's when I really amped it up, right? Like before that, but like getting the car, like, so like So Haven Centers, like that late '89, and then some things kind of I saw Ministry at Club Deco on the beach in like early part of '90, and like that DRI Nasty Savage Sick of It All show a little bit after that, right? That was a Club New, but like just getting the car just made it easy. And so then I would drive Mike to all the Beyond Reason shows. I would put his bass in the car, and that would be a way for me to get to the show. And so that was like that was awesome. And so again, getting a car really made it easier. And then I just started seeing way more bands, like punk bands. And then I kind of understood local bands. The only thing locally that helped me was VUM. Listened to a lot of VUM. They had the world's worst DJs in terms of like enthusiasm or production, but they played killer music. And ultimately that is all that matters. And they had a local show on Sundays, and like they would play. I started hearing like a lot of local bands, and it was awesome. Like that I'd say VUM, as far as like a local resource for me, that's what made it seem more real.
As you started to expand and go to more of these shows, especially getting more into harder music, hardcore, punk, what was that like for you in terms of the crowd vibe? Did you ever notice any crazy pits or fights or anything like
Oh
that
yeah.
you were also there? Perhaps you could share some stories from some of those early moments.
I always found that the most violent shows were like when you blended the two, right? So when you had hardcore bands and metal bands, that was where you had like some adverse effects, right? So I mentioned this, I think, but like that DRI Nasty Savage Sick of It All show. It's Sick of It All. I think it was their first time in Miami, I think. I don't know. Everyone was really excited to see them. There was a lot of skinheads there. The skinhead thing was pretty big in Miami at that point, right? And like in terms of the Kendall's like people that were into that, they were in like a gang called Grudge, or a group. Out of gang seems a little harsh, but yeah. So Grudge was definitely around at a lot of the stuff, and so I just remember, yeah, like so during Sick of It All, a long-haired dude got pulled out of the crowd, and he had gotten like pummeled because he got like pinned to the front. And that definitely reinforced to me, like, I'll be staying back here, right? Like, I don't know exactly why he got like the beating that he got, but he definitely got it. And it was definitely like those type of shows tended to be the more violent ones when you had like different crowds.
Right.
At least to me, that's
Create
the
some
all punk shows were
situations.
like definitely there'd be like people dancing and slamming and stuff, but it was more people kind of knew each other more,
Right.
and it like if it was like a kid suburban show, it was like everybody was tame. It was like a wild ass beach show, like it was a little more wild, right? Like
Right.
and like, but like I feel like the punk stuff was more approachable, and then like when you got punk and metal, that's when it was like, watch out.
I'm sure.
But like for the most part, I kind of like you know stuck to the more like as far as the local bands, like I loved Jobber Now. That
Okay.
was like I loved them. I would try to see them as much as I could, which they didn't really play a lot of shows that I could either get into or I had access to. But every time I could see them, I just thought they were the coolest thing. Like they had matching haircuts, right? Which I thought was the coolest thing ever. Like the Jobber Now hair, the Jobber Now haircut. I was like, I just thought that was so cool. And they ripped live. It was like they were like awesome. Omar, the bass player, was like ridiculous at his instrument. So they were all like super talented, right?
Yeah.
But he was like, oh my goodness,
And there are
like
a lot of
what?
places popping up where bands like that will be playing, like the Thrash Can or the
Oh
Junkyard,
yeah, yeah.
Washington Square, and there's
Mm-hmm.
others that we
Mm-hmm.
can definitely get into. But do
Yeah,
you remember some of those other places that you were going to, seeing bands like Jobber Now?
yeah. I mean, like again, like most of the stuff that I saw was on the beach, right? It just like Club Boomerang, Red Room, Junkyard, Cameo, Square, Thrash Can. It just that's where most of the shows were in that era. Like it just at least the ones that I went to. I know there were other shows other places, but you know, a little bit before that, like before we got into that part of me doing stuff, there was a place a little closer to home called the Grove Cinema that was in Coconut Grove, and they had they used to do this is another like more like alternative culture thing, but forever they did Rocky Horror Picture Show, you know, where the acting out, everybody's dressed up and all that stuff. And I had been to that a few times, like because drugs were definitely a part of it, and that was a motivator back then. And that part was awesome. But I saw like Beyond Reason played at the Grove Cinema a couple times, was killer. That was another venue. They had shows at UM. I saw a couple shows at UM. So like bands like Big Mouth and Pontius Pilate had started. That Evan, the drummer from Flaw, was the singer in Pontius Pilate and initially, or whatever he was doing, interpretive performance art. I don't know, but like a lot of those are the main places that I would see stuff.
A lot of these places that we're talking about existed in Miami-Dade County at that point,
Yeah.
right? So, did you ever have any opportunities to cross the county line and go to whether it be Broward or West Palm Beach?
Not really. Like, so I went with Beyond Reason. Like, they played in Melbourne once, right? And that I went with them once for that was cool. But like, I didn't know about anything outside of Dade County, to be honest. So I didn't go to like everything I could have, but no, I never really went up out of Dade County, right? Just there was enough going on there that really satiated me, to be honest.
Right.
Like again, I knew things were happening other places, but I didn't really get into them until like the last summer before I moved to Gainesville. I went to a few shows in Fort Lauderdale. But like it wasn't until then that I kind of started to venture up a little bit.
Were the
Because
shows that you went to in Fort Lauderdale, were these local bands or touring bands that were?
mostly touring bands and like because like the stuff on the beach has started drying up, like venues. Thrash Can was closed. The Junkyard, like it just became like it wasn't going to happen anymore. Square started to get a little weirder. Cameo kind of stopped doing shows. Like, and so the shows weren't happening in Miami. They were moving north. And I got a little bit of that, but I kind of was like, I don't want to go. Like, that's a 45-minute drive one
It's
way. I'm
far.
like, I'm not like
Right.
this. And then once I had gotten into college, I was like, I worked a summer camp job that summer and just, was like,
Yeah.
I'm just going to do this and we'll pick this back up in Gainesville.
As you're spending more time in the scene, going to more local shows, did you have any idea or learn about who were the people bringing in some of these bands? Who was booking some of these shows?
Yeah. So like through the Beyond Reason guys, I knew Rabbi. And I was in the Rabbi world. To me, he was like the coolest guy, right? He like, if you knew him back, if he always struck me as one of those people, like if you liked Rabbi, he was like the shit. If you didn't like Rabbi, he was like the worst, because he had a thing. I mean, I don't, like, and it did, I don't know. I guess it didn't, later I learned that it didn't resonate with everyone, but to me in my little group, he was like a superhero, right? Because he was a little bit older than me, and he was the one that was making all of the hustle, and like he like, so when I got to high school, the drummer from Homesick Abortion, the drummer from Beyond Reason, Jason Lederman, we went to high school together. So we became better friends then. And Jason and Rabbi were pretty good friends. And so I like listening to all of the people talk about him, he was like the coolest, right? And so like in terms of promoters, like he's the one that I always think of, right? Like and then like bigger stuff, I don't know, cellar door people or you know, like kind of national stuff, but like No Clubs and Fat Harry, like I that stuff seemed like different planet. But Rabbi was the guy for me. Like I went any show he would do, I was there, 100%. All of our friends were.
And there were a lot of those.
He was really. I think I was in the sweet spot, right, for him. Like figuring out what and where to do it, and then like also being super into it. So like I missed probably the early shows that he did that were like rocky, and then I moved before he burned out and got like over it, right? So that like 3-4 year period was when he was really maxing out. So like I would try to go. I didn't go to all of his shows, but as many as I could go to, I went to.
I want to shift gears a little bit
Yeah,
and start getting more into your personal musical journey of playing music.
right.
Now, I want to think back on the first organized band that you were able to be a part of, where you were creating your own original music, you were playing shows, whether they were in someone's backyard, whether they were at an actual hall or something to that effect. What comes to mind as far as some of the earliest bands or projects you were involved with?
Well, so I played like my buddy Rod, right? We had a high school band and our junior high band, and we played metal covers poorly. And we played the talent show, and we played, like a backyard party, right? Like, but we played a couple of them for sure. And we started writing our own kind of songs, but it was like this kind of, we weren't like, I wasn't good enough to play like metal music because I couldn't proficiently play that. And the other guys in the band didn't want to play like the punk music that I was more interested in. And so that kind of wound down. So that was the first band I played in front of people with, but we never really like pushed it beyond like the kind of friendly confines, I would say. And then jumped to high school so I reconnected with Jason, like seeing him play like Haven Center and just seeing Homesick Abortion and like somebody I knew playing in a like original band. I was like, holy shit. And he was doing a band called Blur. They were not British. They had two R's, but he had left. So he wasn't in any of those hardcore bands anymore. So it was like a different thing with this guy, Andy, that I knew. And then this guy, Pete, playing guitar. And I knew they were happening. I had seen them a few times. And I just was like, oh, this is pretty cool. And then they got in a fight with that guy, Pete, and they basically kicked him out and they asked me to join the band. And so I joined the band, and that was like my first like punk band. And we changed our name to Ideal. And then we played a couple like parties or whatever. And I was just like so set on playing on the beach because I had gone to all the shows. That's where I was going to see shows. So to me, playing a show at the beach was like making it, you know what I mean? Like, and I was like, how is this going to happen? Like, I don't know like, who do we got to talk to? Right. And like, we knew enough people. We couldn't kind of catch a break. I don't know. We weren't very good. I think that was the more important part. I guess that's the lead part, but like, I just couldn't really make it happen. So the way that I finally got my breakthrough was Mary, that worked at Y&T. We went to high school together, and she was a year older than me, and she worked at the record store, right? And so she knew fucking everybody. But I was like, Mary, there's a show coming up, 4th of July, SummerSlam, Junkyard. Gotta help me get and she's like, what? Like, I didn't book that. What? And I'm like, come on, please, beg, beg, beg. So she got us on that show, and it was like all the bands that I knew, right? Like Beyond Reason was playing, and just it was like gonna be the coolest thing, right? I was like so psyched. And they were so you called on the phone back then to like confirm with the club, right? And so we called a couple times, nobody's fucking answering. We're like, shit, is this real? Because we weren't on the flyer. And so we finally talked to somebody, and they were like, oh yeah, come down. Yeah, you guys go on at 4:30. We're like, okay, 4:30. Okay, we're first. It's gonna be awesome, right? This is gonna be super cool. We get down. We're like, all right, we're on. So we get there, and we're like looking around, and like nobody's there. We get there like at 3:30. Nobody's there, right? It's like way too early. Like shit. Okay, finally, someone from the club gets there, and they let us in. We're like, oh, we're this band, and the guy's like, who? And we're like, and they're like, all right, whatever, just come in. And then somebody gets there. He's like, oh yeah, they're gonna play at 4:30. So we set up on the stage, right? Little stage of the Junkyard, but it's like I'm so nervous. I'm so excited. I like, smoked so much weed to just even get out of the house that day because I'm like buzzing. We get up there to start playing, and like right before we right before we get on, I realized the club doesn't actually open until 5. Like Mary had worked out a deal with the guy to let us like test the PA, but we weren't actually. So while we were playing, the only people there were the other bands loading their stuff in.
Wow. That's funny.
And I was like, but man, we went for it. I mean, like full on, like, I mean, we played 4 songs, I think, because we simultaneously like ran out of energy because we were trying to go as hard as we could. Plus, we kind of realized like how like Assholeparade it was, like all at the same time. And I just remember like, I remember Jason looking at me when we finished. He's like, it's not open yet. Yeah, but it still was like awesome to me. I was like still the coolest thing.
I think it's so cool, Matt, to listen to these very early beginnings, because to know all that you have done after that, it has to start somewhere.
Oh
And
yeah.
these early stories are so much fun to unpack. What came next?
That was it. I mean, so like so we were Ideal. That band kind of took me through high school. Um, we ended up playing more shows. We played kind of a lot of shows at Uncle Sam's on the beach. Uncle Sam's Music. We we ended up meeting Tom Balker, who was in Smoke Dog at the time, and he was really starting to book shows. Like kind of like more people were popping up doing what Rabbi was doing, and Tom was one of the people that was getting active and was really nice to us and me specifically. And I always was so grateful for that. And so he got us on a bunch of shows, which was great, right? And so I'd say Uncle Sam's was the place we played the most, and that band kind of fizzled out. I'd say like spring of '92, kind of like, it's just everybody just kind of it just we had our 18 months of productivity or whatever that was, and like just having fun being dorks,
Right.
really.
That's
and
what it
like,
sounds like. It was a fun
yeah,
time.
that's absolutely what it was. And so that was it. That was the only band I really did in my life. Like that was
Okay.
it. And
Interesting.
then I moved to so that's like spring of '92, and then in the summer of '92 is when I moved to Gainesville. And then my mom was like, gotta go to college. So I applied. I got into the University of Florida, which was awesome. And so when I moved to Gainesville in August, I didn't really know anyone. Like not anyone that I would call like a friend, right? Not that I would seek out. And also you got to remember it was a lot harder to connect with people then. It was, you had to just go to their house, and I didn't know where anyone lived. So I didn't really know anyone when I moved to Gainesville. Like none of my friends like in music moved to Gainesville. Like none of the people that were in my bands or my immediate peer group, they either like went somewhere crazy for school or they didn't leave, right? More the latter than the former, but like I didn't have any like immediate friends when I got there. And so this is what maybe this gives a reference point for where my head was at, but I was like, all right, moving to Gainesville. I saved up all summer, right? I bought a quarter pound of weed. I bought a sheet of acid, and I was like, I'm gonna make friends when I get there, right? I'll find a way. And so that's what I did. And I just hung out and gave people acid and like got high with people as a way to start like making friends. Like the first year I lived in Gainesville, I lived on campus. And that's really how I met people, was like kind of through drugs initially. And then I started going to shows. So at that time, when I moved here, like, I don't know if you've been to Gainesville, but like it's very much a college town, you know? So the university sits right in the middle. So I'm living on campus, right? And right across the street from campus, right, across the main drag, right, there's a little complex, like a little crappy strip mall, 4 record stores, 4 of them. School kids, hide and seeks, Bobaloos, Toms, all there. It was sick. It was like, I couldn't believe it, right? Like, I would walk over there and I could like price shop, you know, and it was just like, it was insane to me. And like the record culture was so deep in game. I mean, I know it was deep in Miami too. It was a lot harder to be connected to it. I got to Gainesville and it was just like, it just seemed like it was everywhere. You know, it was just because all those record stores were all right there. So there was so many people just like hanging out, like in that little like quad with like, it just was like this, like utopia seems like a stupid thing to say, but I was just like, I couldn't believe how much action there was in this like little block area. Like, I come to find out later, you know, like this kind of crest of the music scene in Gainesville had kind of boiled over. And so a new one was on the way up. And that was really like the No Idea punk scene, and like No Idea the magazine was starting. I had seen that the summer I moved before I moved to Gainesville. I had seen one in Miami. And
What did you think of it when you first saw it?
it was awesome. It was the one with Fuel on it, on the cover. And I was like, this is so cool. Like, what? You know, the language in it was really like approachable. It didn't seem as like extra worldly. Like MRR was awesome, but it was just, you know, it was all stuff that I never was going to get a chance to interact with. The No Idea thing seemed more relatable to me, you know, and because it was, I don't know, it just did. It just seemed younger to me. I don't know. The fact that like they, you know, No Idea was putting out these singles and there was the magazine going on, and like the bands were like same but different. And it just, I don't know. And they just seemed like so much more cohesive, you know, to me.
Sure. Was there certain places that a lot of these local bands were playing that you were learning about and eventually discovering as well?
Yeah. So, I mean, like, so when I moved to town, you know, again, it was so much easier to find out about stuff, because in Miami, you know, I'd have to drive to Y&T and then hope there was still a flyer that somebody had taken down, or that New Times actually was current and people had printed the show listing, or one of my friends' bands was playing. So like, again, it was kind of like a little bit harder to find out, because I was a kid in high school, living in the suburbs. It wasn't like, you know, I could pull out my phone and like, oh, what's going on? You know, it wasn't like that. So coming to Gainesville, again, there's all these record stores right there, and they all have flyers everywhere. And it was just, everything was walkable, you know, and it was just like, okay. So yeah, like, you know, the main 2 places for shows when I first got here were the Hardback and the Covered Dish. And it was like, there was other places, you know, Club Velvet, and like there was definitely like weird spots and stuff, but like those were far and away like the places.
What was it like for you stepping foot for the first time in the Hardback or at the Covered Dish?
Well, so the Covered Dish was very similar to Washington Square to me. Like, it was a little bit bigger, I think, but like really similar vibe, right? Like, Square was cool place for shows for sure. Again, I never played there, but I saw a lot of shows there. But it was always kind of like I think it's overselling it, but it was always kind of pro, right? Doc, right? Giant voice, like faceless sound guy, no Bambi's in the pit, like
Sure.
all the like, just like,
Right.
it had a lot of like, I saw a lot of touring bands there, right? It just was like the place for that stuff, right? Whereas the hardback was more like Churchill's. It was like dilapidated, kind of shitty, local bands mostly, and so that's basically what the division of labor was like. So if I had to compare them, that's what it would be. Now, also back then, there was the Florida Theater that was doing shows that was more like the Cameo,
Sure.
same size, old theater. And
Right.
back then, it was like, back then, the university, like events department, whatever, they would fly bands in to play there. Like, so you would see all kinds of shit, there, like, or pay them, whatever. They don't really do that anymore, which kind of stinks. But yeah, it was, I just remember moving here and being like, so kind of, I couldn't believe how accessible everything was to me. Right. And like,
Sure.
it was also the first time I was living on my own. So like, I'm sure that so I could go out every night. I'm sure if I had stayed in Miami and had the ability to go to a show every night, like it would have been so different. I would have made friends with all the people at Churchill's. I would have like, like that were hanging out. I never really got the chance. And like, I was also becoming a little more confident, like kind of smoking a little less weed, like trying to like not hide in my shell as much. And so I think kind of all of that kind of happening together, kind of, again, if I had stayed in South Florida, would have been a way different experience. I probably would have ended up moving to Fort Lauderdale, like a lot of the people from Miami, but it just didn't happen.
Right. How soon was it after you had relocated, started going to school at UF? Did you begin to dive back into playing music?
Oh man. So I wanted to start immediately, but I didn't know anyone. And then in that January, um, this guy Jose that I had known in Miami, right? But I saw him out one night at a show, and I was like, "Holy, whoa, Jose! What do you?" I know. I kind of introduced myself. We had met, but we weren't like friends. But we had met at shows, and I liked watching his bands and stuff. And I was so desperate, and I knew he played bass, and that's what we needed. So dude, I got this thing. He's like, I'm all about it. Let's do it. So he comes over, we start playing, and it's awesome. And so that's Utility, right? That was my first band in Gainesville. And shortly after January, his buddy Johnny Mendoza moved up from Miami, and so he a very charismatic guy, and so he was our singer. And so, like at that point, I hadn't been in a band in like almost a year. So I had so much like energy built up. So we just had a lot of music pretty quick,
For
right?
those
So
that had never heard Utility, how would you describe the sound of the band?
it kind of had a little bit of everything. It was kind of fast, but then it was kind of like noisy, but then it had like some breakdown in it. It just was like, and with that band, Johnny was such a character, right? It just, you came for him because he just was like such a peacock about everything. Handsome guy, so out there, like you just couldn't take your eyes off him. And so like we would do tons of covers, but like we had so many of our own songs. So it was like such a fun band for me personally. Just really getting to like write a bunch of the music and be a part of the creative process. And again,
Sure.
I just loved being in a band. I loved it. I loved that dynamic with the people, and I love the like trying to get shows. And so it was so fun.
Is the band Utility also part of the origin story of the Utility House?
Of course. Yeah. So okay. So the band really forms in March '93, right? That's like when Johnny comes in. Jose had been in the band for 2 months, learned a bunch of songs, and I moved into what would become the Utility House, right, in May of '93. So in Gainesville at the time, there was a lot of like punk houses,
right? They're like I'm sure the Spoke guys talked about the Spoke House, right?
Of
So
course.
and across the street from the Spoke House was the Barcelona House, which I would assume they talk about too.
They did
But
not mention the Barcelona house.
and then there was also the Van Bilder House. They were all like next to each other, right? So I'd been there for shows and hung out a little bit, and so that was the part of town I was looking for a place, and so I found a house that it was just enormous, but like it was in between the Spoke House and the Hardback was the easiest way to put it, right? Um, Probably like 4 blocks from the Spoke House. And it was like it used to be a doctor's. So there was a hospital right behind it, Alatra General. And I guess the story goes that it was an old doctor's house, like a doctor from the 50s that built the house for himself. So it had a big piece of land, like half-acre plot, big piece of land. And for whatever reason, it was like the only house on that stretch of the street. And across the street was like a radiology center, which no one was in at night, right? And then behind us was this like weird halfway house, rent a room type house where it was like 10 different rooms rented individually. So there was no one to piss off, kind of. There was, but they weren't like unified. So I moved in, we just got the house because I wanted something in that by the Spoke House, right? But it just had this huge wraparound porch and it had this enormous living room, like just enormous living room. And then it had a dining room and a kitchen and the backyard, and then, 4 bedrooms, but like bedrooms were huge, right? So we moved in there, and then we started practicing in the living room because it was just so convenient. It was like, where else are we going to practice, right? Which this thing is so big. And then, so we started practicing in the house, and it was tough going for us to get shows because it was really kind of based on who you knew, right? Like just like everywhere. And so we tried the trick of like making the tape of the like good band and giving the club. So I gave the cover dish the Replacements tape saying, yeah, this is our band. And Bill was like, I know who the Replacements are, dude. This is not your band. Like that only works in certain dives in Miami,
Right.
apparently.
Sure.
So that was a bummer. And that it took a long time. Finally played the dish later towards the end, but it never really was in my wheelhouse. Anyway,
In a way, though, Matt, it's kind of good because I feel like it almost adds to the lore of the utility house because of what you were able to accomplish
yeah,
with so many of the bands that came through
right.
the
Yeah.
house.
So it wasn't until when Jose moved here, he knew, so Scott Stanner, who played guitar in Jobber Now, he was living in Gainesville by then too. And he was in a band called Don't Be One. And Scott was always super cool to me personally. I did not know him in Miami. I just was a huge Jobber Now fan. And the fact that he was here and he was nice to me was like so awesome. So that's when we started to get some shows, right? Like playing, and Jose, so Don't Be One was kind of Sam Miami kind of band, Descendants, I guess, but more like on the Sam I Am side. We played with them a few times, and they were much more like ingrained in the ongoing music scene. And so he kind of helped us start to be able to get shows at the Hardback, and start to kind of like meet more of the people. And everybody was pretty nice, don't get me wrong. Like all the bands that hung out were all super friendly and everything. And I remember one thing I wish that I had sent it to you. This always stuck with me. I have it somewhere. I just don't know where it is. So, back then, people like zine culture was pretty big here in Gainesville, right? So I remember one of the first shows that I went to, there was this woman handing out these flyers, and it just stuck with me. Like, so the flyer was it was like a wanted poster, right? Photocopied, written up or whatever. And it was John Resch, Dave Rome, and Var Thielen, right? And it was like, have you seen these people, scene captains, right? And I didn't know who any of them were. And so I remember reading it, and because they were all in bands, right? So Dave was in Radon, John was in Spoke, Var was in Bombshell and did No Idea, and so it was like, I remember reading it and I remember like, okay, I guess I got to find out who these people are. And so through Scott, like he introduced us to John, right? And then through Bill, I kind of met Dave, but like Dave was, doing the battery thing by then. And like Radon in Gainesville, Radon was like so like outer worldly, right? They were already such a thing, like a phenomenon that the likes I had never seen before, but like Quit on steroids, right? Like just the turnout and the response, it was like something I had never really seen before. And so they weren't really like a band you would hang out with because they couldn't do anything casually at that point. Like Spoke could play a show and it'd be fun and like 50 people would come or whatever on a good night, 150, Radon was like, it was like match on dry wood, right? Like by the time I moved here, it was 500 people every show minimum, and like bonkers, like couldn't play, right? Like they would play the hardback and they couldn't really finish a set because you just get bowled over. They couldn't play a house party because it was fucking bananas. Like you couldn't fit that much humanity in it.
What do you think it was about Radon that just brought that level of people and just interest in the band?
I don't know. I mean, like, well, first off, they're fucking awesome. Like the songs stand the test of time, especially that first batch of songs. Like I still spin that 7-inch. It just absolutely brings it, right? And like it's an interesting band because the two primary songwriters have their own kind of voice. They're similar, but like their take on songs are different, right? Like Brent, some people really love the Brent songs, right? Some people only love the Dave songs, and it just was like, it just became really relatable. And then there was like a little bit of the Fugazi effect, with like, when you would go see Fugazi, there'd be like 1,000 people there and like 500 actually knew who they were. And then the other people were just there because it was a giant thing to be there. And so Radon, I think kind of, at least in Gainesville, they kind of got that inertia. They never really had that outside of Gainesville. Like it just was this magical thing here. I mean, and like they played like the Misfit songs and Husker Du songs, and like it just was really, and they just had such a vibe, like so much energy. I just remember the first time I saw them at the Dish where they recorded it. That I don't know if you have that live record. I was at that show, and it's just like the energy was like, I mean, out of this world. It was like, and they would do it with like a wink, and like, just like, gotcha, like they just, you could tell that they had such a great sense of humor, even if you didn't know them. And they just were like, they were telling a joke that everyone was in on. You know what I mean?
Right.
They had the magic. Like, I don't know, like Quit had the magic too, but they weren't as relatable to me as a fan.
Sure.
No like stamp or anything like that, but just in terms of like Radon had this thing where it didn't matter what kind of music you liked. You just were like in awe. And they were like mythologized by the time I got here. So like everyone you knew was like, dude, Radon. It was like, it had already happened. I missed the like inception, right?
Sure.
I never saw Stabilizer. I never, like I didn't see Big Gay Dudes. Like I missed that, right? By the time I got here, Radon was like fucking Radon,
Did they ever play the Utility House?
Yeah.
What was that like?
It's fucking awesome and sucked. Like that's that. Going through that summer, I decided to start like, hey, let's have a show at the house, right? And that's kind of when the Utility House kind of like happened, right? Like it was called that because we lived there and we played every show because I lived there and I wanted to play every show, and I booked the shows. And it was pretty funny because especially the first crew, I was definitely, and this was a reoccurring theme through that house, I was definitely the only one that wanted bands to play there. Everyone else was always like so bummed. Like, I wouldn't ask anyone. I just would do it. Like the first show we ever did was it took a little while to get going, but the first like real show, like we played a couple times just in the living room. So like our friends, but the first like show we did with, was Less Than Jake and Bombshell and Utility. And it was pretty, so Less Than Jake, when I first moved to town, I saw them play. They had just moved here from Clearwater. Where are they from? Somewhere like Tampa, I think, that area. Vinny and Chris, anyway. And they were playing with Chris Campisi at the time when I saw them, who was also in Don't Be One with Scott. And he ended up being in Highway 66, also in Assholeparade eventually. But that's spinning it forward. Anyway, I had seen them. And then when I was in high school, to bring it back a little bit, when I was in high school, I had met Roger. Just we're the same age. He didn't go to my high school, but we both went to like punk shows and backyard parties and stuff. And he had a crappy band and I had a crappy band, and our crappy bands had played a couple of the backyard shows together. And so I kind of knew him. I didn't realize he had come to Gainesville until like that, like, till Utility had already started. He had been here, I just didn't know. And I remember him telling me he was going to try out for Less Than Jake. It's like, cool. I mean, I'd seen them. The guy, I knew the guy could sing, like Chris. So I was like, oh, that sounds like Green Day. It's cool. Anyway, Roger got in, and they played the house because I knew him. And he was like, hey, I'm in the band. I want to, let me play. Can we play your house? I heard you're doing a show, that kind of thing. I was like, yeah. And I didn't know that they had like changed the sound. Like they had gotten horns. I don't think it was their first show as like a full-on ska punk band, but it was definitely towards the beginning. We built this little stage outside, and we were kind of thinking we would just do it outside, right? And so they came, and a lot of people came to the show. That was like they played first, which is kind of funny in hindsight, and people like loved it. I was like, I couldn't believe just the horns and the like upbeat deliver, everything, all the things about Less Than Jake. I'm not saying they were like in place then, but like you could see it, and people were like loving it. And like I remember they played most of their set, and there was like this like kind of negative dude that hung out around our house a lot back then, because we had a lot of different people. This guy Seb, and he was like, dude, fuck this band. This band sucks. It's way too happy. He threw the breaker, and like in the middle of their set, like all the lights went up, like it was like the weirdest thing. And I was like, wait, what? And I saw Seb, and he was like, I was like, fucking dickhead.
Wow.
And so they played most of their set. Like it was fine, but we ended up getting it back, and like we ended up moving the show inside. And so Utility and Bombshell played inside, and that was the first show. Right.
Did he sabotage any other bands, or was it just Less Than Jake?
No, it was just them. And I think he was just like, people are having too much fun kind of thing, like,
okay,
it's going too well. It wasn't nothing personal. It was more just like, like a fuck this. So they like people in town started calling it the Utility House. I don't remember. I didn't put that on a flyer for the first, like, I don't know, year and a half or something. I just would put the address, 923 Southwest First Avenue, right? And the radon thing was funny because when they played, I didn't ask. I would never have. No one asks radon to play your house. Like it just doesn't make any sense. Now our house was by far the largest house in terms of capacity that I'd seen in Gainesville. And still to this day, I've never been to a house that had a larger like showroom, like just the way that it was. But still, like I would never, dude, radon, especially at that time, like 93 era, 94 era radon, you're talking like peak of their superpower, like no fucking way. And we had this show, I can't even remember who was playing, somebody not great, friends, but I had started hearing earlier in the day, like, hey, dude, Radon's going to play. And I'm like, what? I hadn't asked them. I hadn't talked to them. And it was like, just understood they were just going to show up. They wanted to play the Utility House. They were just going to show up and play. And so that's what fucking happened. And I swear to God, it was like the Pied Piper. Like, they rocked up as the show was going, and like there was like, 50 people there. I swear to God, it didn't happen like this, but it's like they brought 300 people with them, and it was like insane. And so when they got on again, like the Utility House, you played just right there on the floor, and people are just in your face, and it was fucking bananas, right? Broken couches, table shattered, like, all that glasses broken, all that stuff. But it was incredible. I mean, you couldn't hear the vocals because PA kept getting knocked over. They probably finished like 5 songs, but everybody had the time of their life.
That's great.
You just needed to hear the first bar of the song, and the whole fucking crowd sang. So it was like, they definitely played there, but it was like better as a memory than a reality.
Sure.
What
other bands played the Utility House that brought some good stories with it?
Oh man, so many. I mean, my favorite band at the Utility House was Floor, because they just had this like vibe, right? So once I started kind of accepting I was going to be doing shows, like I wanted to have more shows, right? So my high school band had played with Pontius Pilate a bunch of times. And Ron Sass was the bass player in Pontius Pilate. Well, we were friends. And when I would come down from Gainesville, Ron lived in North Miami Beach, right? With Jason Page, who did blah, blah, blah. And he did Dirge Records. And they had an apartment in Miami Beach. And I would stay with them sometimes just to hang with Ron. And so I was friends with him. And so one time when I was home, I saw, he's like, come to Churchill's, my band is playing, right? My new band. And it was Gus. And that's the first time I saw Gus. And Floor played the same show. I think I sent you the flyer, so I'll have that one.
You did. The very cool flyer.
Dude, it was awesome. All right. And like, I remember that's the night I met Drew. And I remember like, I was blown away that his voice was amazing, I thought. And his projection, like what he was putting out, I was like, man, this band is awesome. And Ron was I loved his bass playing. It was kind of like very much in the kind of Lou Barlow, like, You're Living All Over Me era dinosaur bass player, right? Like noodly melodic, which I fucking loved, right? And so couple that with a dude that could sing, that played fast, it was great. And so I was like, this is awesome. And so, but Floor was like, I just was like, that show at Churchill's was the first time I saw them. And it was, they played and like, they got booed. Like everybody hated it. It was just like, I thought they were awesome. But so I talked to Steve, gave him my contacts, and every time Floor played at the Utility House a number of times, and every time they would play, they would bring a smoke machine and they would fog out our whole house. And then they would just drone for like 20 minutes and then play like 3 songs. And to me, it was the coolest thing ever. And so I loved Floor. Was probably my favorite band.
You think the reaction for Floor was different than what they may have gotten further south in Miami?
Yes, for sure. I'm pretty sure that Gainesville was the first place that really put their arms around them and like appreciated them for what they really were. Like I don't know. I mean, again, you'd have to talk to them, but like they're in Gainesville immediately, they were like a big draw, like from the get, like, and it was always like, not only because, we would always do our best to put them on the best shows, or I would, I guess. But also just every time they came, they were so great. Right. And so they've always done really well here. And so they were probably the best to me. But so many bands played there. I mean, everybody from Los Crudos, like we started having touring bands, right? So you just start staying on the map. And so like that era, like the if you have the Human Objection 12-inch cavity, you know, the little sticker picture on the back, that's the Utility House.
Okay.
Yeah, because Jason was in the band then. So that Lederman, he played drums, and
Right.
that's how they got the show at my house, because Jason asked. Right, I had met Dan, but I didn't really know him well enough, you know. And Jason was like, "Hey, let's play your house." So they did, and they were sick, and that picture is from there. And a lot of everybody from Florida played there, but like we started getting a lot of touring bands. I just started meeting a lot more people, and because the house was so big, like the shows started to take on their own kind of, you know, afterlife, because it was rare to have a show like at a house that big, you know. I don't know how else to put it. So that era, every band that toured, I mean, from like hardcore bands to indie rock bands to like crust bands to big bands, little bands. And so, I mean, again, we had everybody from Los Crudos to Raina Maria to His Hero's Gone to 108 to, you know, fucking Elliot, Josta 14, Falling Forward, like, I don't know, all that shit. Like,
Yeah, you really
had every band. I mean,
had
I
a
could give you a
variety.
story for like almost every band,
I'm sure.
but it's like, here's one that it's funny to me, mostly because of the way it played out and some of the ridiculousness. So my roommates, again, I was the only one booking the shows, and like eventually more like band people started to like move in, you know. But I was the only one booked. No one else booked a show there, except for the last 3 months we lived there. Drew moved in, and Drew booked a couple shows, but it was always me. And my roommates kind of hated me because I would trash the house, right? And they were like, it sucks. I can't even fucking park in my own house, fucking weirdos in my fucking room, and you know, all the stuff that goes along with it.
Right.
One night, that band Mineral from Texas, they played, and I didn't know who they were. I just was like, whatever, on a run of doing shows. And so I said yes. And the show ended up being like pretty big. Like a lot of people came to the show. And one of my roommates got so mad at me, he like, during the show, he took the mics and hid them. I was like, fuck this. Like, I hate you. And I remember there was people from out of town for that show, because it was one of their only Florida shows. And it was like a fucking Tuesday or something weird, you know? And I just remember I was like, hey, where are the mics? And we couldn't find the mics. And it's not really fun to see Mineral without the mics, kind of the whole point of the band, you know? And so I was like, shit, okay. They had already set up and everything. They were like ready to go, right? And there were no mics. So I was like, fuck, what am I going to do? All right. I looked. I didn't know he had taken them. And so I had to go. This is already like, we're already in Tire From Now On era now. But so I had to go to Ben from Tire From Now On, who lived like, I don't know, half mile away. I had to go to his house because he had 2 mics, right? Get them, come all the way back. So when I left, all the people are there, like crowded around the band. The band's just standing there and everybody's just looking at each other. And I'm like, all right, dudes, hold on 1 second. I'll be right back. And I left. I had to be gone 30 minutes, maybe more. I mean, it took a while. I get to Ben's house and I'm like, dude, I need microphones, because he doesn't answer his phone and there's no like cell phone. So I just had to go there, pound on the door. He's like high as fuck. Like, what do you need? And then he's like, hold on, let me roll this joint. I'm like, dude, no, I need microphones like now. And he's like, oh yeah. So it takes a while. I get back. It's got to have been like 30, 40 minutes. Nobody has moved. And it's quiet. Like no one's talking. Everyone's just standing there waiting. And the band is still sitting there with their guitars. Like, I'm like, have you been doing this the whole time? Like, oh shit. I hooked them. I'm so sorry. And like, I walked. I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like, that was a funny one. There was that the band, the VSS played there. They were like a band from California, kind of in the like gravity scene, more like underground hardcore world. And they they had been in a band called Angel Hair that was like super caustic. And so then they had added in keyboards and stuff. And so a bunch of the hardcore kids were excited they were playing, but they came and like lampooned them. Right. So so the band is playing and they have all their keyboards and they're like matching outfits and everything. And I just remember the band Palaka, they were the main like instigators of that. They, they started like a cha-cha line of people like brushing their teeth in front of the band as they were playing as a way to like troll them. And they started doing these like choreographed like robot dances, and the band just kept getting more and more angry. It was pretty funny. I mean, like,
Was it usually a peaceful vibe at the utility house when shows, or were there ever any moments where there were some fights or violence, or perhaps even the police were called?
I mean, fights were not really tied to shows. They were more like social. Were there violent? Yeah, like we had shows where people would pull knives and stuff, but it was more like a social beef, not a show beef. You know what I mean? And like, dude, I mean, the cops never really came, to be honest. Like, again, we're spinning it all the way forward, but the very last show we did at the house, this is kind of funny. So utility is long done by this point, right? And Johnny had moved back to Miami. Andy is MIA. I don't know what the heck ever happened to him. The drummer from Tire From Now On, Jason, he finished out the last couple utility shows before we wrapped it up because Andy had like flaked completely. And so we wanted utility to play the last utility house show, right? So we hadn't played, we had broken up. And it was funny because at that point, people didn't really remember that it was a band, because the house had become way more popular than the band ever was. And so we wanted to like just go like full on, right? Like one of Johnny, the singer, one of his favorite bands was Butthole Surfers. So he really wanted to like do like a show, right? So like, okay, so we had, so it was this big show. There was like a million bands. So for our band, Johnny had a sawed-off shotgun and he had hollowed out all the bullet shells and stuffed it with Vienna sausages, like as a homage to the Butthole Surfers. So the idea that he would shoot people and it would look like you had been shot because the Vienna sausage would splatter on your body, right? And then we had TVs that we had mounted behind us, like playing like Barney and like snuff films, and just like I had a domino mask on, and I'd shaved like a big mohawk and I was wearing a cape with no shirt. I was going for like He Who Will Not Be Named dwarves vibe, like just totally over the top. And so it's like 3:00 in the morning, right? And like we're about to play. Like I'm tuning my guitar. A fucking cop shows up. And I'm like, gotta be kidding me. And there are like a lot of people there, not really to watch us, but just there, like just there. I had done this like thing where every flyer from every show, I had mounted it throughout the yard and the house. So I kind of had made this like exhibit and I had wrote all a bunch of stuff about, so people were like meandering everywhere. And the cops show up and they're like, dude, no, like this, who lives here? Like, this isn't happening. And I go out there and I'm like, I look like an idiot, right? I got my domino mask on. I'm like out of my mind, right? It's 3:00 in the morning, shirtless, cape, fucking dumbass. And I'm like, hey man, like, listen, for real, I have no way to like explain this to you, but I just need like 15, 20 minutes, right? And he's like, what? Like, no. I'm like, come on, man, please. Like, and he's just like not taking me seriously. And John Henry, my like life partner, he was the only person that lived with me at the house the whole time. He moved in with me and he stayed all the way through the end. And he was one of the people that just hated the shows, like just the whole time. He never played in a band. He loved, music and stuff, but he never played in a band. He was just like, you people just come in my house, ruin my shit. Like just basically, I don't know how he stuck it out and lived there the whole time, but dude, I'll never forget. I'm talking to the cops. I'm like I'm just dying. He just strides out of the house with the biggest shit-eating grin on his face. And I shit you not, he walks up to the cop, puts his arm around the cop and goes, hey, let's take a walk. And then they walk back to the car. I'm just like, what? He walks to the car with the cop. He comes back to me and he goes, all right, go play. Cop gets in the car and drives off. And I'm like, so we play, it's fucking dumb. You know, we do all our dumb shit. The show goes as well as a utility reunion show years after would go. And we're just sitting around and I'm like, you know, once everybody starts to like leave and I find John, I'm like, dude, what? How? And he's like, oh, dude, John was a waiter at a restaurant downtown, like a kind of nicer one for the time. And he had seen that cop smoking a joint like a few weeks prior at the dumpster and didn't say anything, but they made eye contact and it was all good. And he's like, I saw who it was. And I just walked out there and was like, you owe me, you know, you do. He's like, we need 30 minutes, take a trip around the block, come back. If it's still going after 30 minutes, you could shut it down. And the cop was like, so that's what happened. It was awesome. It was like hero's game, right? Like,
yeah.
Such a win.
That is interesting how that all connected. And you had mentioned too, Matt, there was this overlap in terms of the utility house and also the band that you would also be in, Tired From Now On, which was the first band that I had ever seen your name connected to in terms of physical output. Was Tired From Now On, was that the first band you were a part of where you were putting out so much music physically?
Yeah, for sure. Like Utility had made a demo, right? Ideal had made a demo, but actually didn't play on it. They had recorded it with the other guy. So I definitely was never on a record, right? So Tired From Now On was the first band that I was a part of that had records and really toured and did band stuff. And it was awesome. And it definitely grew out of the utility house and utility in general. So like, as we started meeting people, you know, I had mentioned that Scott Stanner was in Don't Be One, but he did like more of a metal band called Biatch, which was like a kind of like heavy, you know, kind of like sludgy, kind of like metal-y band. And I don't know if the Spoke guys brought him up, but this guy Major, who's from Orlando, grew up with all those guys. They used to have this song where they would have somebody just scream, right? It's on the record, the full-length CD, and that was always Major. And so Scott had seen him singing like that before, and so Stanner got him in Biatch, and Jose from Utility was in Biatch with Scott because they knew each other from Miami. And so Jose met Major, and so Utility, Andy flaked out like in early '94, the drummer, and we started meeting more people. So we had met this guy, Jason Dooley, Van Dyke then, but Dooley, and he had played in Bombshell. And I had recognized him because he had played in this band People's Court from Tampa. And I had seen them in Miami. And I knew that they were a thing. And the bass player from People's Court played guitar in Bombshell with our band I had seen a bunch of times. And so we made friends, right? Me and Jason and I met at the Hardback and we made friends. And so we started talking. And when Andy flaked out, I had asked Jason, could you fill in? We had some utility shows booked and I didn't want to cancel. So Jason played drums on the last like 4 utility shows. And then we started playing as Tired From Now On because, you know, it was me, Jason, and Jose. Jason and Ben were super tight because they played in People's Court together and they go back like way far back. And then Jose was playing with Major and Biatch. And so just kind of all came together and we started practicing at my house, right? Like in early '94. And that's really where that band started, in the living room, right? And it was such a fun, that band, like, so coming out of Utility where, you know, we were just like, kind of squares, kind of outsiders, especially from Gainesville perspective. And the music was a little bit like confrontational, but awkward, and then coming into a group of people that was much more a part of the scene, right? Jason and Ben kind of knew everybody. Major was friends with a lot of people. And so we instantly had like credibility. I don't know if that's a word, but like,
No,
it just was it wasn't a thing to get shows anymore. I'll put it that way. Like anything we wanted, we could have in that way, right? In the Gainesville way. So it was like, and it was fun because at that time, most of the Gainesville music was like catchy, upbeat, right? Like sing-songy. Even the stuff that was like more on the gruff side was still like more on the gruff, like Leatherface, right? It was still like melodic guitar stuff. And I specifically didn't want to do that because I couldn't play that. I still can't. Like for the most part, right? Like the way that I play music is just much more like caustic, just the way that it comes off of the guitar for me. And so I couldn't play in a catchy band like that. And so I was so fortunate. It was so fortunate that everybody else was on the same page, right?
Sure.
Like, and I learned so much from those guys. And like, I was the youngest one in the band, which was fun for me, and just like sponging off everyone. And it was just like, I just felt like, man, they knew so much about music. And like Ben was this really great guitar player to me. And Jason was this incredible drummer. And I had already had a rapport with Jose, who was an awesome bass player. And Major was just like the coolest guy ever. Like, and so it just was like this really like kind of magical coming together. And like people like really liked us, even if they didn't like our band, they liked us.
Sure.
And so like we just were instantly like inserted into a lot of things. And it was kind of funny because, most of the time, at least, especially the first like year or so, there were no other like heavy bands. So we would just be the like sore thumb on everything, but we didn't care. It was like, this is awesome. This is the music we're playing,
Right.
like, whatever.
What are your memories of recording with Tommy Hamilton up in Tallahassee at Georgia Street?
So everybody, all the Gainesville bands of that first era, Spoke, Bombshell, Radon, they all recorded with Tommy. So Tommy obviously had been in like a million hardcore bands, right? Like in the early 80s and had kind of been around. But at that time in the 90s, he was in a band called Gruel, and they would come play Gainesville. And he was, and still is, I'm sure, I haven't seen him in a million years, super nice. And he's, studio. And I can't remember who was first. Maybe it was Spoke. One of the bands from here went and recorded with him.
Spoke did record with.
Yeah, I think they were the first of the Gainesville bands. And then everybody did it. Everybody. And it was just like, that's kind of where you went. And like, Ben and Jason were part of the scene when we met. And so when it was time for us to record, it wasn't even like a question. It was like, hey, we're going to Tallahassee. And I was like, okay. So I had never met him. And it was cool. It was in his house. And like Utility had recorded, but we had recorded with Rob McGregor, one of his first recording projects. He had just kind of started Turd, like officially, Golden Tone, I guess now. But anyway, it was awesome. Tommy was super nice. He just knew a lot about like music, what you were trying to do. Like he wasn't necessarily like super into what we were playing, but he totally got it. And he was
Sure.
like really helpful in terms of like, all right, we're going to play this part live. We're going to do this as an overdub because it's going to bleed and wash out and like that kind of stuff. But the whole thing was pretty quick. We were only there for a couple of days, and we had a couple of friends, a couple of girls that all lived in a house together, and we stayed with them the whole time. And it was super fun. Like just kind of tearing it up with them at night, going to the studio in the morning. And it was great. We did that demo, right? And like that whole first batch of songs was was so cool. Georgia Street, right? Like, so such a cool thing. And like, so we did that, and we came back to Gainesville, and I made a demo of it, and I started giving it out to people. I don't know if we ever like sold them. I just, dude, check this out. And I made some dumb cover and gave them out. And our buddy John, that was one of my roommates actually. He was living at the utility house, and he was like, I want to put this out, because that was a thing in Gainesville. People put out records. And so it was like, you know, he got some info from VAR and was like, I want to do it. And so he started Pell Grant Records, right? Because he just took all his student loan money, and he put out our 7-inch, and it was amazing, right? And like, Major's friend Brian Jones is the artist that did the cover, and he ended up doing all the artwork for all of our stuff. Sweet kid, our guy, I haven't seen him in years, but uber talented, right? And like, he gave us a bunch of art, and like, we put a lot of effort into the 7-inch, right? Like, going to Kinko's, right? And like, putting everything together, made like a huge insert, and like, just really wanted to go all in on it, you know. VAR took one of the songs to put on the No Idea CD comp, right? The Big Pants Waist Pressed Fabric. That was killer, you know. And it was so cool. I couldn't believe that like it was like happening, you know, like these things that seemed so unattainable all started to kind of flesh out from
Sure. I know you also recorded with Steve Heritage from Ass Suck and many other bands.
Yep.
What were some of the differences between recording with maybe Tommy Hamilton versus going over to Steve?
So I mean, if you knew them as people, that'd be an easier question for me to format. They're so different, right? And especially for Tired From Now On, Steve played guitar in People's Court, right? With Ben and Jason. So they had all been friends for so long, and there was a little bit of acrimony actually between them. But when we recorded Romantic, it was fun. I mean, Steve was working at More Sound at the time, right? And like, he was just trying to like absorb everything he could. And so he had access to so much equipment, right? And so many people that were like pro and so, you know, experienced. I mean, Scott Burns and all the engineers at More Sound. We didn't record Romantic, didn't record at More Sound, but he basically rented a bunch of gear from More Sound, and we recorded in a house in Tampa. And Steve, like, he just was such more of a part of it than Tommy was, like, in the sense of like, he just wanted to help put a stamp on the sound in a good way. Like, he was more like, in between every take, tune, right? Add a tune, you're behind on this part, play faster. Use this. I'm gonna switch out your head. You want it to sound like this. Like, whereas Tommy would never do that. Like, it wasn't a thing. So Steve was much more a part of the experience than like Tommy was. But he had like a vision for what he wanted, right? And like, he did a lot of like, it was the first time I'd heard someone really like use compression to like remove all the outside noise, like zip ties, you know, like that shit. Like, so it was just a much cleaner sound.
Sure.
Like, our band was so noisy, like bleed everywhere type of like sound coming from all over. I mean, and really, like, you know, it did sound like 5 people playing different songs in one song, you know? So Steve did a lot of work to kind of make it much more cohesive. He helped us really kind of get a lot more aerodynamic, I think, my opinion.
And when you were taking what was being put out as far as studio recordings and then taking that to a live show, what was that like? Did you feel like it captured the same essence of the band's sound? And what were some of your most memorable Tired From Now On shows?
I mean, we had played those, like the album especially, we had played those songs so much. Like, you know, like, we had just we toured a lot, we played a ton of local shows, so we knew those songs, at least our take on it, and so I think the recording was different than the live only because it was like a lot more audible. There was a lot of like, there's a lot of subtleties on the records that you would never hear live because it'd just be too, we take that My Bloody Valentine approach, right? Just turn everything up and just whatever, man, fucking, and like, one of the defining aspects of the band was Major's parents when he was a child. Major, like a small child, Major's parents had given him a siren as a toy, and it basically, you would just plug it in and there was no volume, no on switch. It was just, you plugged it in. It was like an air raid siren. And it just was like, it was deafeningly loud. And so we would use that at shows. So eventually we like soldered it into a power strip, and then Jason would plug the power strip and just hit the power strip and it would just be on. So we would turn it on in different parts of the set. And so there'd be like this crazy siren. So like when you saw us live, it was just such an onslaught of everything. And we were like really, theatrics of going crazy, and there's a lot coming at you. And so I think like the recorded output is just a little more consumable. Again, not in a bad way, just difference, right? And I think I'm really happy with all of it. I think what a great experience. I feel so lucky to have played with those guys, and we're still friends. We still tag. We have a little text group going. We're actually going to do a little practice. Everybody's coming in town for fest. We're just going to do practice for ourselves. We're still friends. Like only me and Major still live here, but it's what a great group of people, and I still have so much respect for all of them. I mean, we played Fest like 10 years ago, so like well after our band ended, but we're doing the practice because we've written like 5 songs, like 6 songs, like hey, I recorded this Sounds Like a Tire from Now On song, we'll send it to each other kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, maybe, sure, like it's mostly just for us. It's just because we're still like each other and we want to like hang, right? Like that's really that, we played so many shows that I think were like amazing. One of my favorite shows that we ever played was we played in the utility house, and like towards the end, it was, I think, the last time Tyler and I played there. We didn't play the last show because I didn't want us to, but I took everything out of the living room. So you have to understand, like, the bands would play on this one side of the room, and then there was this huge rest of the room, but there was like a living room. There was a TV and couches and whatever. And so one of the things that had started happening with the band is that we would have friends come up and play with us on this song. Like they would play extra instruments and stuff. And so for that show, so the living room is this massive room. We set Jason, the drummer, up in the middle, and then we put my amp in one corner, which is really far, Ben's amp in the other corner, so the 2 guitar amps, Jose in another corner, and then we had Drew playing with us in another corner. So we had kind of quadraphonic sound, and then we ringed Jason with every drummer that we knew with floor toms and cymbals and stuff. And so we had like Hot Water was already here, so George from Hot Water and Mark from Palatka and like just everybody in town basically. And we did that song for 45 minutes in the living room, and it was like just kind of hypnotic, like just noise jam, if you can imagine that. Yeah. And Major just walked around kind of curating it. We had hung 2 mics from the ceiling just in different parts, and he just would walk and hit the mics and scream intermittently. And I always thought that was like a really kind of pure expression of the band. I think like what we wanted to put out there, that was a really cool version of it. We played so many shows in so many places, like tour shows, so fun, right? Some amazing, some terrible.
Where did you guys go all across the U.S., or was there certain parts of the country?
No, we did the Donut, right? We did that big tour with Gus in '95, right? So my connection with Ron from Pontius Pilate, and then meeting Gus, and then bringing them up for shows and hanging out with them. And like, we did that. We did a big, 7-week tour around the States. So Florida to Boston, to Seattle, San Diego, back to Atlanta, back up to Cleveland, back home. Right. So it was about 8 weeks or something. And then we did countless East Coast trips, like one to the middle, one to Chicago. Like we toured all over, right? Played in Canada a couple times. Awesome. We played big shows, like super big shows. We played tiny shows with no one there, right? Like all points in between. Like, and we had 13 people in the van with a trailer, and I think I sent you a picture of the inside of everybody sleeping. And
You
like,
did. And the picture may not capture the smell. What did it smell like?
It was awesome. I mean, to me, it was like incredible. To everyone else, I'm sure it was repugnant. But we went. VAR from No Idea came with us on the first part of that tour. Like, we had become friends. I mean, he was obviously great friends with Ben and Jason from playing in Bombshell, and we had become friends. And so he jumped in the van with us. And so, like, going places with him at that time was super fun because he was awesome, and he knew so many people just from writing the zine for 10 years and doing the label. And like, so we would go places, and like here's an example of what it was like with VAR. So we went, and this is one of those like, God damn it ones. Like we played a show in Minneapolis, and we played with the D4 guys set up the show. The D4 they were happening, but they were just in the nascent period. So we played with one of Patty's other bands, and we played there, but VAR was friends with Tom Hazelmeyer from AMREP. So we went to the AMREP building, and they were still like, this is 95, summer 95, right? And they had bought this old like dentist office. That's what AMREP was in. And in the basement of the office, Tom had built a studio. And, VAR just like called the office line and was like, "Hey, I'm actually in town." Like, and they're like, "Dude, come over. It's awesome." So we all went over there, but like Ben decided to go on he would do this a lot, so not uncommon, but he just went on this like weird walkabout, like just like stroll or whatever. And again, no cell phones or anything. So we get to AMREP and we're hanging out, and Tom's like, "Dude, you guys want to do a session? Maybe we'll do like a single. This is killer. Like, you guys are awesome." We couldn't record because we couldn't find Ben. Like, it was like, we tried desperately. We even drove around for a while, but like, you just, it's like, you can't just find someone in a city. That's not how it works, So that was a missed opportunity, but what a fun, we had such a blast hanging out there all day. And it was funny because they ended up, they had already had their like explosion where they got helmet, had happened, and they got big, and they did well. And so they had put out like 1 million records, right? So they gave us a garbage bag full of like 300 cassettes that we had in the van. And we would just listen to a cassette. If we liked it, we keep it. We didn't like it, just throw it out the window. Because you just have this like unending, like, what is this? Like, how many albums does Lubricated Goat have? Jesus Christ. Like, it just was like another Hammerhead record, but it was awesome, like, and
there was a lot of that stuff that was so under the radar.
Dude, I mean, like, I knew like the hits, but like, yeah, there was so much of it that I had never heard it. Some stuff I loved, like me and Drew got really into this band Chokebore that they did a couple records for. I don't think they ever like popped, but sick band. And I still love the records, but I only heard of them because of those cassettes.
I was gonna say, you may have heard the most AMREP stuff ever, considering how many tapes.
Dude, we listened to all. I made a point of listening to every one of them. It was wow. It was, that band was so fun. I mean, like, we were really starting to like pick up steam, and it just, I couldn't hold it together. I just I got really ahead of myself. I was like starting to like, by this point, now we're like in 90s, like 90, end of 96 into 97. And I'm like, dude, I'm already working at No Idea, right? I'm like really been doing shows at my house for years now. I've met a bunch of people. So now I'm like really kind of in the flow of things, and I've met so many people. So there's a lot of opportunity for us constantly.
Right.
And I am like saying yes to everything. And everyone in the band is like, what are you doing, dude? Like, we were just starting to really fracture. Right. And so we had gotten offered a bunch of shows with Napalm Death and At the Gates, and I was like, yes, like, dude, yes. I had seen Napalm at the Junkyard, right, with Godflesh when I was in high school. It's a sick show, and they were only getting more popular. And I'd never heard of At the Gates. I think it was their first show over here, but it was awesome. And no one in the like Major was really starting to sour on it. He wanted to do. I think he was kind of moving past the like aggressive nature of the band, and I was putting us even more into like the metal world, because that was our avenue to get into bigger crowds, right? Like it just was, because that's the kind of music we were making, and that's the scale of people that were really responding to what we were doing. And like the Gainesville culture was just a bunch of punk kids that we were friends with, right? And I was kind of pushing us more into this metal, like hardcore type thing. And I think he just wasn't about it. And he was just ready to do something different. I mean, things have a shelf life.
Sure.
Traditionally.
Right.
And so we did the shows with Napalm, and that was kind of the end. And but just what a great experience. And now we're like great friends. And like, again, getting to do the record, my first LP, like my first 7-inch, my first LP, the first LP on No Idea. So fun, right?
Yeah.
Like a little take it to my grave thing, right? Like very cool.
And then you wound up working at
So
No Idea. How did that come around?
so like Var was kind of sleeping on our couch at the utility house. He was just hanging out when I got home. So we were just like friends. And he had started to kind of toy. So, as I got to know him more, I got to know a little bit more about what he was doing, right? Like, sure, I knew he wrote the zine. I knew that like he put out records, but like, I didn't really know anything else. So we got to be friends and just talking about stuff. And I was like, man, I love what you're doing. I want to, I'd love to be a part of it someday. And so he had always done this thing where he would trade, records with people. And so like back then that was pretty common. So he would put out a zine, and like, especially towards the end, he was putting out records with the zine. Like that's kind of how it started. The record part of it grew out of the zine. And so he would put out the zine with the record or the CD or whatever. And then he would trade. He'd like, all right, I'll give you 10 zines. You give me back 20 records. So it turned into this little distro that he had, right? And then he would do mail order. He'd take out an ad in MRR and an ad in Flipside or whatever. And so he put out No Idea number 12, the one with the double LP. And so I went out there and started helping him assemble them and kind of helping with some mail order crap. And we were just friends, and it just kind of grew out of there. And then him and Sean Bonner, who had moved to town like at some point in the early, like 94 or 95. And he had put out a record, Toy Box Records. And he was just he's always like a go-getter guy. Right. And so he and Var cooked up this idea to start a formalized distro, right, which they call Blind Spot. And so they rented a building attached to where Var's dad had a machine shop. Right. And so they brought all the records that Var had traded for there, and they started running like they would run the labels out of there and the distro. And so I would go there and hang out because it was so cool. They had like this building, and it was like full of records, and it was awesome. And then, they had hired this guy, Eric Blake, to do the mail order. And I was always hinting to Var, like, dude, it's got to be me. What are you doing? What's this guy? But he was already doing it. He was friends with Sean. And then Eric kind of got sick of it and I jumped at the chance. And that's kind of how I started working there. Just started helping them around like a couple days a week, once or like 6 days, 5, 6 days a month. And then it just kind of snowballed from there. So that started in like 96 and like really full-time, no work, other jobs by 97. Right. So
What was that environment like on a day-to-day basis? I had no idea.
dude, it was amazing. I mean, especially for someone that was so immersed in music, right? Like that was my whole life, right? I would wake up in a band house, right? Walk past all my gear, make coffee, and then ride my bike to No Idea that had like a million records and a stack of mail orders, right? Bar would come in from the post office with all the orders, open all the letters, take all the money, and then give me all the paper, and I would just pack orders. And then, we would get a phone call, we would do wholesale orders, and it was just like, it was so cool to me. And it just was like your kind of like dream kind of mine anyway. I never got to work in a record store. And so being able to like jump up the food chain was like awesome. Right. So it was magical. And it just, the distro was expanding, and then VAR, like Less Than Jake had like exploded. Right. Like, and that really fueled the label. Right. Like, I mean, VAR put out 2 singles for them, and it was the CD that Losers, Kings, and Making Fun of Things We Don't Understand. That it's just like, I mean, that was the foundation for everything that came after. It just, we couldn't make enough of that. Like, we just couldn't. And so, traditionally, one of the biggest obstacles with a creative endeavor is resources. And all we had was resources. So it was crazy. Like, just, being around that energy, and VAR was able to do almost anything he wanted, like in terms of like band and layouts, and just, he didn't have a lot of obstacles, and it was so fun. Like the bands would come out and hang out, a lot. And we would do shows like all the time. I would be setting up shows. I mean, so this is like, I'm still in the utility house. And then anyway, utility house was wrapping up. Right. And, we moved out in May of 97, and we kind of all went our separate ways. So I'm working at No Idea. Right. And the last version, so Gus had moved to Gainesville. I think that's been covered on this podcast before. And they had Drew and Sam moved into the utility house, and Ron and Jay Page moved in somewhere else. And it all fell apart pretty quickly for them in Gainesville, mostly because Drew was the only one that wanted to be there.
Okay.
And so anyway, when we moved out of the house, I was like a little bit like crestfallen because I didn't have a band, I didn't have a place to do shows. Right. And like, I was like, man, this sucks. And so I was still doing shows at Full Circle, which was like a place downtown where I would book, the bands that I knew that would get in touch with me through No Idea, or when No Idea needed to do a show, I would set it up at Full Circle. And then just on a whim, Drew was working at the Hippodrome downtown, which is right next to the Hardback. And, the Hardback, when I first moved here, was like the place for like, especially local bands. Like it was like the punk venue, and it was run by a guy named Alan Bushnell. His family owned the building and ran the place. And I think in the summer of 96, Alan decided to run for city commissioner. He basically had gotten mad that he couldn't get stuff done, and he felt like he'd been targeted because he owned like a perceived punk club. And so he really wanted to kind of change his image. And so he changed the name of the venue to the Lyric. And he tried to get away from doing shows and just wanted like a cafe, right? Well, spoiler alert, nobody wanted the food there at the Lyric, and the poetry readings weren't really paying the bills, right? And so spin it forward 6 months, Drew just stops in there. And if you've ever like hung out with Drew, you know he's got the gift of gab. And I don't know, he just did it with Alan, right? And Alan was like, you guys want to buy this? You want to buy this from me, kind of thing? And Drew ran to my house and was like, dude, Alan he would sell the hardback. He's like, do you want to do it? And I was like, instantly like, yes, of course, dude, what? Of course. So I went down there with Drew the next day and was like, Alan, is this real? He's like, yeah. I was like, yeah, dude, like how much? He's like, $3,000. And I'm like, okay. Like, I didn't have $3,000, but I was like, I'll figure it out. Like this, how do I say no to buying the hardback? You know,
Sure.
It's like at that point, I'm 23 and you're wanting to sell me my favorite bar in the world. Like, yes, I'm going to say yes. And so
Did you have any idea how you were going to run it?
no, nothing. And like, none of my family has money. So like, I didn't even know what that meant. Anyway, so it's funny because first thing I did, I went to VAR. It was like, he was in my life the most. And I was like, dude, Alan's going to let me like buy the hardback, dude. And he's like, don't do it. I'm like, what? He's like, don't do it. I was like, crazy. Of course I'm going to do it. He's like, all right, don't do it.
Did he have any reasons why you shouldn't?
He just thought it was, he's always been like a really forward thinker, don't rehash the past guy.
Okay.
And so I think that he had gotten soured from the Lyric and just like, whatever, time for a new chapter, I guess.
I see.
And so he was like naysayer, big time. And so, dude, I had to hunt, scratch, dig into some drug contacts. So I and just did it, got the money, got it together, and it was awesome. And that was, so I moved out of the utility house in May. And by September of that year, we had taken over the hardback, and it was fucking awesome. And I think I sent you the first show flyer. That show was so sick. We had no idea what we were doing, pun intended. We were just sort of like, we didn't know if anyone would come, right? Like I think I even sent you the agreement I signed with Alan. It was just I still have it.
Send me that.
It's so stupid, but I just always loved that he made me sign that. And he was like, he just insisted that anything that happens here is not my fault. That's on you. I'm like, yeah, man, whatever. Like, let's get out of the way, old man. That was like my vibe at the time, And so, we took a week. We got the keys the 1st of September, and we took like 10 days to like try to clean it up, try to get like parts for the PA, and we didn't know what we were doing, right? And we just got like, I kind of left out the whole like beginning of Strikeforce, but Drew and I were playing in a band by this point, and so we were going to play the first show because we worked there, and then we got our four favorite bands that were playing at the time, or 3 other favorite bands. So the first show was so sick. It was far beyond our wildest dreams. It was so crazy. It was a Friday night. We sold everything. Like we had nothing left, and we had to be open the next day. And we were like, dude, what the fuck? We have nothing left. They don't deliver on Saturdays. No fucking internet, And so I had to go to Publix and buy a bunch of shit. Like, it was just a mess. Like, what a disaster, beautiful disaster, learning experience. I remember the second night. So we had just been focused on, let's just get this open, right? So we put all our eggs in that first show. And it's us and Panthro and Assholeparade and Anklebiter, like just in that first show. It was sick. I mean, we're talking like hundreds of people, and it was like bananas, and everybody bought everything, and all the things were had. And it just was so fun, so fast. And I remember just at the end of the night, I was like buzzing. I mean, it was like 5 a.m, and I couldn't leave because I was like, this is like everything I learned, everything at the utility house, I feel like had led up to that, right? Like going to all those shows in high school, right? Like having to play the show before the doors open, to like, fuck it, you won't give me the show, I'm just gonna do it at my house, to like touring the world or touring the country and putting out an LP, which was great, like all the things. And now I had a venue. It was like I was like pinching myself the whole time. I was like, the first couple of months was like, I can't believe this is happening. And it's so funny because I was like insistent that we keep our shitty day jobs, mostly because my shitty day job was super cool. I was working at No Idea. Drew's shitty day job was selling movie posters for this Rick's Movie Graphics guy. And my thought process was, I don't want to put like a financial burden on the club, a bar, right? Like I want to be able to give all the money to the bands. Like, I don't want to have to make a living off this. That was my thought at the time. And so I was insistent with Drew, much to his chagrin, we can't quit because we got to give all the money to everyone else. It's fucking awesome, right? Like, because that's what we would want done to us. Like if we rolled through the hardback. So we had like the bad show fund and stuff. So band would roll through, there'd be 3 people, we'd give them $200, right? It's all the time, right? And so we just got to do a club like how we always wanted it to be done, and it was awesome. That second night, after that first night, we didn't really have bands, and so we had this woman come and do performance art as Hot Carl. It was like terrible, but like again, I had to go to Publix and buy like a whole bunch of cases of beer. We sold out immediately, and I remember that I stood on the bar like at 11:30 at night, which was like our prime time, right? Because it was a late night place. And I was like, I'm sorry, you guys, I suck at this. We don't have any more beer. And I remember this older woman was like, look, I'm a bar manager. If you want someone to really run this place, it's like packed again. And we had nothing. She's like, just give me a call. I never called her, but like I had to get my shit together. You know, it was definitely a learning process. So fun. We had shows every night. It was like, dude, just so many things happened. And so then like now I'm like working at No Idea during the day, working at the Hardback at night. It was like, dude, living the dream. Like I'm in the moment, right? It's like,
And you're doing music.
yeah, playing in Strikeforce. So you know, we started Strikeforce like at the end of 96, fall 96. And then we really started playing out in 97. But then, you know, we hadn't toured. We had played like in Tampa a few times. We were just kind of getting to that point where traditionally you would start to go on tour. But then we started working at the Hardback. We couldn't go on tour because we'd have to fucking close, you know? So we couldn't tour. And so we never toured with that band. Like we did one trip with this band, Harriet Spy. It was killer. We went all the way up to Virginia. But that was really stressful because we were constantly calling, you know, hey, how's it going? You know, like we just were, it was all 3 of us that worked there. So we had to have friends cover our bar, which is tough, you know? So no, we never really like toured. And then in the summer of 98, Kevin moved. So the band was ostensibly over, you know, pretty quick. We were only together we were only active that first time for like a short 1.5 year period. Cause Kevin always has a little bit of a restless soul and we couldn't really do anything as a band because we couldn't tour. And that's kind of that was the name of the game kind of thing, you know? And so like, that's kind of where that kind of like meandered about, you know?
Sure.
And so in the fall of 97 is when, so obviously the first show at the Hardback, Assholeparade played the first show. They were great friends of ours from town, awesome band. I love them. And we were like pretty close. And Travis, the singer from Assholeparade, was like, he was the only person that I remember that was at the Hardback every night we were open, every single night. Like he had his own bar stool that no one was allowed to sit in. He was there every night. So we were like super tight with him. He was the homie, you know? He was like our unofficial employee kind of thing, you know? He was just there all the time. And so we were great friends with them, loved the band and everything. And they played there all the time, and they were going to play Fiesta Grande. They had gotten invited to play the Slap a Ham Fest at Gilman, and they came into the Hardback, and Drew and I were both working, and they kind of like, hey, we want to get a second guitar player. Kind of, which one of you want to do it? Do one of you guys want to do it? And Drew jumped at it, and it was awesome. So he joined the band that like December of '97. Strikeforce, writing was on the wall, right? Kevin was getting a little itchy, so he did AP. Went out to California with them in January, and then did a summer tour with them, and then was like, I can't do it, right? Like, this is too much for me. Like, it wasn't really his scene. He loved the guys, he loved the music, loved the band, but like it worked in Gainesville, but not like the broader context of what the band was going to be, right? And so when he quit, then I joined. I just took his place. We just swapped, right? So I joined in the summer of '98, like August, something, maybe September, something like that. And so then, so that's it. Like, and then like, dude, like so many things, there's so many Hardback stories that are like absolutely bonkers. I mean, like I could tell you, we could just do hours on that. I remember this was like the third night we were open. Like I was always like insistent on being inclusive in the sense of like, I wanted all people to be able to come there. Right. And so at the time there had been a little bit of an uptick in the skinhead population in Gainesville. And, I was very used to that growing up in Miami. They just were a part of the scene, like a goth kid or like whatever. It just was a thing. But in the kind of like Gainesville type of continuum, it didn't really resonate with a lot of people. And so people were kind of on me to not let them come to the Hardback a lot because they would cause issues. And I was like, no, man, they're part of it. Like, I'm not going to tell them not to come. Like, if one of them gets rowdy, you kick them out. But like, there's no blanket rule. I remember like the third night we were open, it was so funny. There was this kid. We opened at 9. Nobody came at 9. Nobody ever came until 11, right? But we opened at 9. This kid came in. It was him and Travis again. He's sitting at the bar, and I'd never seen him before. And he's just drinking tall boys, whatever. And a bunch of the skinheads rock up. And I'm like, they would always come early anyway, but they like formed this line in front of the building, like a barrier. And one of the main guys got James. I like walk outside. I'm like, James, what's up, dude? He's like, we want that guy. I'm like, the dork at the bar? He's like, yep. I'm like, why? He's like, he's a Nazi. I'm like, that guy? He's like, dude, Nazi. And I'm like, what? He's like, we're going to kill him. I'm like, I got no love for Nazis, man, but you can't. He's like, you're cool. This place is cool. So we won't come in there and kill him, but you have to send him out. And I'm like, what? Like, now I'm like freaking out, right? So then I go back in and I'm like, dude, who are you? He's like, what? I'm like, why are you here? And who are you? Why does everyone hate you? And he's like, I don't know. And Drew's like, dude, they can't kill him here. I'm like, I know. I'm like, dude, are you a Nazi? He's like, no. I'm like, I don't fucking know at this point, So now I'm like, really like, I don't know what to do. So we end up it's so hard to explain this, but the Hardback, it was a large building that got parceled off. Like in the 90s, the Bushnell family sold pieces of the building because they didn't want to manage it anymore. And so it was kind of like a maze in the back. And so there was this like empty spot. So basically we walked him out the back and we made him run on this fence line, like the top of a fence line. We're like, dude, never come back here. You're going to die, whatever. And like they blocked the door for the first 2 hours waiting for him to come out. Cause I was like, man, they're not going to come in here and kill you, but you can't go outside. And I don't know who you are or whatever fucked up shit you're into, but like, never come back here. And so like this shit like that would happen all the time, like weird stuff, like but
that is pretty bizarre, Matt.
But like joyous stuff, all like fun, like dude, I remember working the bar one night where it's like busy as shit. Like we're just fucking slamming. And the bathroom was right off the bar, right? And downtown Gainesville legendarily has terrible plumbing, right? Just it's bad, you know? And I'm like trying to keep up with pouring beers and cleaning and restocking. And fucking this guy, Sam Kessel, comes to the bar and he's holding the sink. Like the sink. And I'm like, dude, what the fuck? He's like, dude, I'm so sorry. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, dude, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, and I just see the water starting to come out of the bathroom. And I like run into the bathroom and he had snapped the sink off the wall and broken the PVC pipe coming out of the ground. And so there's just water like, and I'm like, fuck. So I run back to the bar and I grab like a tap handle that we had with a Marge Simpson head on it. And I just fucking spear it into the pipe to try to stop it. So because I had the water main was way outside on the other side of the building. And so like, you know, and then it's like, all right, I had to turn the water off. It's like 11 at night. I'm packed. There's like 300 people. And I'm like, hey, everybody, there's a Silver Boy outside. You can pee behind the Silver Boy. So like the rest of the night, there's just an ocean of urine because the Silver Boy's up on an incline. It's just pouring down this like, you know, it's just like, that's the way the hardback looks.
Sounds
like,
awful.
Fucking savage. But I mean, that's like how it was, you know, like, and again, like it's me and Drew, we're 23, 24. We're the decision makers. We don't know anything.
Yeah.
So like that's
how long did you have the hardback for?
Dude, year and a half.
Okay. So I mean, a year and a half in the grand scheme of things doesn't seem like a lot of time, but
every night
could happen in a year.
Every night was crucial. Like
right.
It just that's the thing is like we did shows every night, and every band that toured from 97 to 99 played there. Everyone.
Wow.
So it was like, you know, we had everybody from, you know, Drop Dead to Promise Ring to Crudos to Jimmy World to like whatever, pick whatever band. They all played there. So like it was just, you know, like a thing. Like, dude, there's like crazy ass stories where like the summer that Hot Water Music broke up, they you know, they were in Europe, they broke up, they ended up not breaking up, kind of the Live at the Hardback record, like, oh God, we're sticking it together. All that happened while we were there. But I had them working for me, and it was the summertime, and in Gainesville in the summer, it rains every day, and the building was a piece of shit, right? And like it was leaking so badly. We had created this like again, I'm not going to fix it. I'm just going to work with it. Right. That's my modus operandi. And so I made this like trellis system with garbage bags to divert leaking water into trash cans that would have to be dumped every 20 minutes in order to be open. Totally illegal, but whatever. So we were having this like big week of shows, and it was supposed to monsoon all week. So I was like, fuck. Like I called the Bushnells and I was like, dude, the roof is leaking. Can you fix it? And they're like, no. And I'm like, God damn it. You know? And like, so I took all the money we had in the cash register and I went to all the hardware stores and I bought like in the greater Gainesville area, and I bought, I don't know, 400 rolls of duct tape, and I duct taped the whole roof. Like I made all the guys from Hot Water Music, we're up there, and just we duct taped the whole roof. And I just remember like at one point George is like, what the fuck? Is this gonna work? And I'm like, I don't know, man. You got any other ideas? He's like, no.
Was there someone there to actually document this madness?
No, not that I know of. I'm sure there was. I'm presented with so many things that
I just can't envision that. Dude, duct taping a roof.
I was a flat roof with like around the top type things, right? And so I just duct taped the whole flat part, like the whole thing.
It's crazy.
Yeah, I know. It's funny too, like spin it forward in my like civilian life, duct tape was one of my clients. So like I went there to Cleveland to the company headquarters. That story went over well.
I bet it did.
So the hardback ends in 99. You know, it's too bad. Like Cindy Bushnell, Alan's mom, tried to sell it to me. I wish I would have bought it. I had no clue on how that stuff worked. The building, whatever. All good. The last show of the Hardbacks, the Legends, that's its own episode, right? So many things happen, so crazy, so like euphoric, volcanic. I mean, cathartic. I've never had a more like emotionally variant show in my life.
Who played that show?
Everyone. I don't know if I'll ever be able to have a moment like that. I can't even like put it into words, like, because I was like trying to envision like, how do you end the Hardback, right? Like, how do you? At that point it had become like this like institution again, leaning on its history, right? And just like it just every night people were there. We didn't have slow nights. It was crazy. Like it just was like a thing. It popped off all the time. And so it was this like huge thing to be, and we knew, so the people that bought it were like just developers, like the people that buy shit. Because she really wanted me to buy the building because she saw how integral it was to the town and how much love people have for it. But just, it didn't make sense. I mean, the building it needed to get raised, and it did, but I knew that it was closing like by 2 months ahead of time, basically. And so I was like, how do you end it? How do you end it? And I was like, all right, this is how we're going to end it. We're just going to have everyone play. And so it was a Friday and Saturday night, and I set up a back line, and we had 15 bands each night, and everybody played 3 songs. And it's so hard to explain all of the moving parts of that experience, that show, the amount of people that came, like the people that stopped by. Like, again, I could go on forever. I remember that night so vividly still. I don't know why, I just do. Like, so many parts of it meant so much to so many people, and to kind of be kind of a part of that was such a kind of moving experience. It was amazing. Sure. And like the very end, I kind of hit some highlight. The first night was great. Like Hot Water played the last set of the first night, and by that point they were like a really big band, so them playing at the Hardback was a big deal, and it was awesome. And then the second night, we had Radon play, which was obviously a big deal. I mean, Brent was gone by then, but it was still like a big thing to have them play. And by then, Kevin was already living in Boston, and so we flew him down for the show. But we put ourselves on the flyer, but we didn't really publicize that we were playing. It was just kind of like this thing last minute. I didn't even flyer for it really until right towards the end. And it's awesome because we flew him down from Boston, and he was at the first show, but like really like not hanging out because we didn't want people to know we were going to play. And then Drew and I went to the mall because Drew's like, God, let's find something, right? Let's go find something. And so we went to the mall, he and I, that Saturday, and there just so happened to be a tuxedo rental place going out of business, and they were selling all of their inventory. And so we bought tuxedos, like for me and Drew and Kevin, and we were like, dude, this is fucking crazy. So we get back to the show, whatever, we do the show, and then Radon, like we let Radon play, I think like 10 songs, because Radon can't play 3 songs. That's not a thing. So they played 10 songs. So while they're playing, if you've ever been to the Hardback, it's like in this little like weird plaza thing, whatever. So there's like a dumpster that's like a few hundred yards away. And so me and Kevin and Drew went behind the dumpster, which is like so fitting on every level. And we like put on the tuxedos, right? And dude, this is maybe the coolest feeling of my whole life. I mean, watching my kids be born will always be more paramount. Getting married to my wife, always paramount. In terms of music, I don't know. I couldn't even touch the ground. Like I felt like I was moving through time and space, walking from behind the dumpster, because you have to understand there was like so many people there. And again, like the venue itself could only fit like 300 people if it was like gross, like flesh on flesh. And there was probably 600 people, 700 people there. So they had spilled out all over the place.
Wow.
And like the bands played, because Radon was playing, dude. It was like a thing. And so the bands would play in front of these like big movie windows, right? And so you could stand at the movie window and look into the band, and there was like a little door you could walk right in, or you go in the door of the club. We were walking up, and dude, there was like this buzz, like Radon's playing, but it was like we had these tuxedos on. So, and just the crowd started partying, and it was just like this, it's so surreal. It's so trippy, and it was just like, we were never like a big band or anything like that, but it was who we were and what it signified for us to be kind of doing it. In all honesty, Radon should have been the last band because they were definitely the more impactful Gainesville band, but Drew and I selfishly wanted to be the curtain call. And so walking up in those tuxes, everybody just started screaming. I mean, it was like deafening. And I've never been touched so much in my life, right? Like just in the most like, just in the most like celebratory way. Like, I can only think of like a uber famous person, right? It just was like, it was like such a cathartic moment for everyone there. And then we walked in and it just, we started playing and like just everyone's going nuts just because it was the end of it, not us, but like, dude, we played one song and it was kind of like awesome, but normal. And then just fucking that guy, Eric Blake, that worked at No Idea before I did. He had taken a mic stand and like the base of the mic stands, like the heavy, like the weight, right? So it doesn't like spill over. He had taken it outside and he threw that mic stand through one of those movie windows. And while we were playing our second song, I just look up and see like this fucking, it's just all reflecting back at me. Cause it's like a, piece of glass from the 70s. It's not like cool glass now, and just like somehow no one got hurt. Like, I don't know how, but I remember looking up and it just was like glittering above me. Right. And like, then once that happened, it was on. It was fucking on. I mean, like, all the lattice work on the roof pulled down. The PA got destroyed. Like by the end, we played, I think 4 songs, maybe 5. We didn't have any equipment by the end. Like all of the glass got shattered. Every piece of furniture, every table, every chair, every booth, everything got stolen. People ripped the felt off the pool table for patches. Like, dude stole the register. People tried to take the beer cooler. They were just carving chunks of the drywall off. They took the sink, the toilet. Like, it just was like everything got looted. Everything.
Chaos, man.
Dude. And then
Wow.
like there's this whole other subplot of like this guy. There was this guy Danarchy that has been in the Gainesville universe for many, many years. And he used to live at the Hardback when Alan used to run it. And Dan was just a very integral part to the music scene here, and the Hardback meant so much to him. He also had a flair for pyrotechnics. He had taste for arson as well. And so he had been like hinting that he was going to burn it down, right? Like, if I can't have it, nobody can, kind of thing. And dude, like he just started blowing fire. Like everything was getting stolen. And he was one of those like performer guys too. And so he just started doing the like blowing flames against the building, trying to like get it ignited. And like my girlfriend at the time, it was funny. She ended up like taking a bucket of water and running out, throwing it on it. Cause it was like, we had given up playing. Now we're just trying to like, so by this point there's like hundreds and hundreds of people flooded in front of the club. And these fucking, like, we never had problems with cops somehow, but like these cops on horses had come over, and it's like late, It's like 2:30 in the morning. These horse cops kind of roll up, and dude, the horses, dude, it was bad. Like they got spooked. People threw bottles, put cigarettes out on the horses, and so the cops freaked out. So they left, and they brought back a whole bunch of people. And like this woman ran into the bar, and I'm sitting there in like a destroyed tuxedo, and she looks kind of weird, and she's like, I'm a police. She was like not on duty. She's like, I'm a police officer. If you didn't call the cops, you're part of inciting a riot. And I just looked and I was like, what? She's like, do you own this place? And I was like, and fucking dude, Ron from Gus had come up for the show. In this exchange, he's like, you're drunk. And the woman goes like, what? And as she like turns her head, Ron has like this like board. He smashes our phone and he goes, they couldn't call. There's no phone. It was like, and so the cops just flood in. Finally, the cops just come in force and like everything gets like kind of shut down. And it's just like, we end up not going to jail, thankfully, but it was like, so, and they were going to raise the building anyway. So all the damage was, but like the whole building was like destroyed. It was insane.
What a crazy way to go out, Matt.
Dude, ball of fire, man. I mean, like just Phoenix, that shit. It was awesome. I mean, it was
exactly
so fun.
A fine way to put it.
Yeah, it wasn't really like, I felt so lucky to be the vehicle, right? It definitely wasn't me, wasn't anything that I was a part of as running the venue or the music we were playing. It just was like, right place, right time, right? And I will be forever grateful to just have been a part of that, like just a lucky thing to witness. I don't know. And like all the years that led up to that, all the people that created there and made that a space for people to become impressionable and all of the memory that's tied into that building. I think that's kind of what fueled all of that. It wasn't like specifically our iteration or that show or anything like that. It was just like that kind of like what happens now, kind of let's get it while you can now thing. And
thinking about the end of the hardback and the kind of the wrapping up of that chapter, I feel I want to go back a little bit and talk about some of the things that were happening outside of the shows, because those really led the seeds for kind of what I kind of got into next. And one of the things that happens during the time that Drew and I were working at the hardback was the beginning of this record collective called Wayward Council. And I think that really became something that I look back on now and I'm really proud of and happy to be involved in. And that most certainly took root at the hardback. And so when we were working, all kinds of people would come in, fans, people to hang out, new people that I didn't know, people that I hadn't met. So I was constantly meeting people during that time because I was so in public, for lack of a better word. And two people that I met during that time were a husband and wife named Don and Laura. And they were just so full of energy and excitement and wanted to just be involved in the music scene, I think in a way that they hadn't been previously. And they kind of pivoted to wanting to potentially open up a record store. By this point, Don and Laura have enlisted a third person whose name is Frank Barber. And Frank I had known a little better. Frank was more closely connected. He was really good friends with the Spoke people. He lived at the Mega Rock Arena where the Palaca people did a lot of shows. So he was just around. And so I knew Frank better than Don and Laura. And so Frank had really kind of got in on this idea of doing a store as well. And so the three of them came and since they had enlisted Frank, I was more inclined to participate because I had more of a connection with him. And I liked Don and Laura, and they're still dear friends of mine to this day. But at that point, I didn't really know them. And so obviously opening a record store, there's quite an investment monetarily. To open up any small business is a really large effort. And so I just remember we talked pretty extensively about how we would kind of navigate that. And they were gung-ho about putting up the money to start something like this. But I had a different idea. Friday night, Don, Laura, and Frank would come meet me at No Idea at 5 p.m. We would then pull about 600 records. We would sticky tape them, marking it up 50 cents or $1 each, and we would put them in crates, and then we would bring all of that to the Hardback, and we'd open at 11 a.m. at the Hardback on Saturday, which we were never open during the day. So we would open at 11 a.m. and we would close at 6. And basically everything that we sold, we kept that extra $1. And then everything we didn't sell on Sunday, we went back to No Idea and reshelved all of it. And that's how it started. And we had just folding tables at first. We had, eventually we built shelves. Eventually, and again, so no money was ever invested. And so we started to grow our own inventory. We started buying records that we wanted to do and kind of keep. So it just kept expanding from there. But up to that point, no one actually invested their own personal finances. And so that started in, I think, February or March of 98. And so that ran for a year at the Hardback. So obviously the Hardback closes in January of 99. By this point, we had been enlisting some friends. It just became this kind of vibe where people would come and just hang out all day Saturday. We would do everything from drinking games to risk marathons to having jam sessions, all kinds of just silly stuff during the day. And people would buy records, and it was awesome. We did in-stores, we did little record release stuff. And so we had just built up all this momentum. And so when the Hardback was closing, there was just this, we can't stop now, right? We had a bank account by this point. We had inventory. And so, and VAR was still on board with us pulling stuff for consignment. And so everything was still rolling. And so there was another club in town that I was friends with called the Down Low. And it was owned by some friends of ours. And they had an upstairs, downstairs setup. And so they were amenable to us bringing over all of our racks and our inventory and basically storing it upstairs. And then downstairs is where the venue was. And so same deal. Every Saturday morning, we would go with our new No Idea Infuse, and we bring all the racks down and we set up in the Down Low. And we continue running the store throughout that spring and summer of 99 to the point where we started to really have some standing. Okay. We have some money. We've been doing this for over a year and a half. By this point, we had 30 or 40 pretty steady volunteers. And so we were just kind of reaching this critical mass. And still, no one's put anything in except for time and passion and energy. And so then by the anniversary just passed, which is kind of fun. But by October of 99, that's when we had enough money to put a deposit down on a storefront. And so we opened up the Wayward Council store in October of 99 on University Avenue, 807 West University, right next to Recycle Bikes. I mean, to me, I was so proud that we got there, just again, from seed to opening, the desire, I think that was always the goal, was to have a storefront, but it was never front and center. Everything kind of happened organically. Now, one thing to remember too is that, so this was all done by volunteers. And so, which I had taken cues from, Gilman Street, ABC No Rio, some things I'd seen in the punk scene that had inspired me in my travels up to that point. And that's kind of some of the things I wanted to honor.
I know that Wayward Council had run a lot of shows.
Oh, yeah.
There. And I want to just talk about that just for a moment, because there had to have been some good highlights, some stories from some of the different bands that came through, both local, but also ones that were touring. Anything come to mind from some of those memories and experiences?
Yeah, I mean, so many. So we did a lot of shows because it just made sense. It was a good space for it. And it was something that, and for me personally, I had always had a venue in Gainesville up to that point. If you think about Utility House to the Hardback to now Wayward, I always had a place to book a show under my own conditions. And so I was so used to doing that I really just kind of kept it going. At the beginning, the first 2 years, we worked with a pirate radio station, a guy in town that did a pirate radio station where we'd broadcast every show for free. So we just set up some mics, and this was one of the coolest things I thought. I don't know if you know Bill McFadden. He's the singer in the Belltones, the South Florida band that relocated to Gainesville by this point. I remember for the first year, I would invite Bill up, and so the pirate radio station would set up, and we would have turntables, and we would just spin records and kind of chit chat about stuff. And it was, for me, super fun because Bill's super knowledgeable, and we got to talk about records and talk about the show, talk about the bands, and just that was a really fun aspect. And so the bands would play, we would broadcast the set, and then we'd come back, play some records, and then broadcast the set, and so that was kind of a part of the initial configuration. As far as fun bands playing there, I mean, just so many different things come to mind because it's hard to separate all of them. One thing that I did was I solicited as many people as I could that I knew had ties to Florida via No Idea for old flyers for shows that happened specifically in Gainesville. And I got a really good response. And so I would say about 2005, we papered the walls with flyers starting from the 70s all the way to 2005. And I liked that setup because when I would come in and do my volunteer shift, I could just, stare endlessly at whether it was, Roach Motel or Alcazadic or, Bicycle Thieves or Horticulture or Spoken Radon.
What happened to all that when it finally closed?
Oh, man. A lot of it I burned, which I know is immature.
You burned all the flyers?
A lot of them.
Wow.
I did the same thing at the Utility House. So there was like a little bit of a molting process. I don't know.
This is like the third time that fire has come up in one.
I know it follows me. I think it just seemed to make sense. We also did a mural competition where we ended up doing murals over the flyers. A lot of them I have copies of, so I didn't lose everything. But I just the shows at Wayward I thought were really the connections people had because it was so intimate. It was very small, right? It was very immediate. And you could see there was no illusion or pomp and circumstance, right? Because the store was pretty small. You saw all the parts of it. The PA, there was only 4 plugs. And so there was really no frills to any of it. And so, the store at that storefront ran from 99 to 2012. So, we had hundreds and hundreds of bands come through and, I don't want to belabor too much of the mechanics of it, but I ended up being the only person that stayed connected to the store throughout its entirety, which I lament only because I can't tell you how fascinating it was just to see the evolution of the store.
Sure.
And by the end, the through line was that people still honored that initial concept of a free space. We're making something that we are invested in. And that was something that I really tried to ensure never went away. I never wanted it to be something specific. I only wanted that space to be reflective of the people that were putting energy into it. And so Wayward was for me personally, was a pretty amazing experience because it gave me a structure to interact with so many new people. And it really reinforced to me, I really want to be in this community and not my immediate peer community, but this alternative punk underground community
Right.
writ large.
And
I thought
You have an artifact very close to you on the side,
Oh yeah,
the WAY.
yeah. So Roy Stiles, friend, original volunteer, very talented woodworker. He cut the sign. He made this hand sign that we put on top of the building, and I kept most of it. And yeah, Way is on the wall back there.
I'm
Really,
glad you
really
didn't
cool.
burn that too.
I mean, I like to be a little theatrical. You know, it's kind of part of it.
Nothing wrong with that.
So
It's nice though to maintain some of those artifacts, and it's so wonderful to hear some of the backstory about
yeah, I mean, I
council.
tried to count at one point. I have a couple. We did a couple of things in Wayward to kind of mark time. At year 5, we did kind of a retrospective zine that I have, which was neat. And at year 10, we did a big party. I did a carnival, rented out a roller skating rink. It was insane. We did like a big like town celebration. And I think in total, we had about over 400 volunteers through the course of the time there. You know, and such a wonderful experience for me. I wish more people could have seen it the way I saw it. You know, I mean, definitely I made it clear that once you weren't feeling it anymore, there's no obligation here, you know, and ultimately that's why it ended up folding, is because the energy for it had kind of waned, and I could have kept it going, but I didn't see the point. It wasn't for me. I had already gotten far more out of it than I ever needed. And so once it was a struggle to get volunteers, to keep it open, to keep new energy, we just decided to fold it. And that was in 2012. And it was a great send off. We had a last show. Assholeparade played and Mauser played, a bunch of bands of the day. Really, really fun. Kind of caught people off guard a little bit, which I thought was par for the course.
Were you in Assholeparade at that point when they played?
Oh
at
yeah,
Wayward?
yeah. You know, those guys have been doing it since '95. They had been really active already, right? And John the drummer, and Travis the singer were really the forces driving the band. And I really connected with those guys. I was a huge fan of the band, obviously, before I joined. And once I got into the band, it was so fun. I mean, just the energy that they put out, the way people responded, and just getting to write that music, which was something that I'd been a fan of, obviously, bands ranging from Napalm Death to early DRI to, you know, all points in between. But that was my first time really getting to create with people that were very well versed in that medium, and I learned so much from them. And it was super exciting to just kind of jump in. And we played the last Hardback show, right, in '99. I had played a few shows leading up to that, but that was my first like big show with them. And then when the Hardback closed, we really started building towards, and this was something that I was so excited about. We did which is going to be ridiculous sounding, but we did an 8.5-week tour in Europe right after the Hardback closed. And that was my first time going on tour internationally. That was my first time being on a tour that long. And it was kind of amazing, kind of terrible, kind of all points in between. We did the tour with a band from Tampa called the End of the Century Party, which was really dear friends of ours. I had actually done their first show at the Utility House years prior. And what an interesting group of people. You know, they're all so different, but so talented. One of my all-time favorite bands ever, still to this day. And so Palaka had toured in Europe the summer of '98. And so they had kind of, in the hardcore world, had broken the seal. Obviously, Less Than Jake and Hot Water Music and As Friends of Us had all been prolific and touring in terms of Gainesville bands at that point. But in terms of like a hardcore sense, Palaka was the first one to kind of break that seal. And so when the two of us went, we wanted to see and do as much as we could. And so that's why the tour ended up being so long. And the tour was amazing. But the thing about the tour I wanted to mention here was it was the first time that I realized that what we were a part of in Gainesville was really resonating outside of Florida. You know, when I go on tour in the States, invariably every city that you play in has somebody from Florida. You end up talking about, I end up talking about nights at the Hardback more on tour than I do in town. You know, there's always, 4 or 5 people in every city that, I remember, yeah, you moved away, XYZ. But being in Europe, and again, this is like pre-internet, at least mass distributed internet, still a magazine and word of mouth era. And the fact that people knew so much about Gainesville, they knew so much about the bands. By this point, I had already been working for VAR doing mail order for 3 years, and people knew me. Every show, there'd be one mail order kid that would come up, and they knew about the Hardback. They knew about the Spoke House. They would want to ask stories about Radon. It just was, I couldn't believe it. And we're talking from, being in London to being in Barcelona to being deep in Eastern Germany and Dresden to being in Prague, all points in between. There was always one person that knew something or wanted to know something or wanted to connect. And I just couldn't get over the fact that it had kind of translated in that way. And that was the first time that it really cemented in my head that I hate to say that this was important because it just feels a little too aggrandizing, but it was having an impact.
Sure.
And I appreciated it because I was in it and I knew that I liked it. But it was the first time that I realized that this was really resonating with people everywhere. And again, I just remember coming home from that trip and just really being kind of proud of Gainesville. I don't know. It's a hard thing to articulate. And so coming back, and so the Hardback's closed, but I have all this energy to put into Wayward, and I'm really psyched to be doing mail order, no idea. And really the label is just like VAR is killing it at this point, right? Like he has had whether it's timing, whether it's luck, whether it's his vision, you can kind of place it wherever you want. But, so many things that he was working on were really resonating with people, starting with, so many great records have come out on No Idea, but like just some really ones that made an impact for me. By that point, it was that first Radon 7-inch really, I think, is the template. That was the first thing that, I think the 11 comp sold way more, right? That CD, the big pants. But in terms of really establishing that you could really make your mark, to me, that Radon 7-inch was still the one.
Sure.
All those records, early records, were incredible, but
I think the music is definitely important, right? But
yeah,
one other visual aspect that I feel like also had a significant importance in No Idea was the stress face logo.
Yeah.
I feel like when you saw that, you knew it was a No Idea release. And a lot of labels didn't have that branding. Do you remember the origins and how VAR may have put that together, and what your take is on the stress face?
Yeah, that's definitely a VAR thing, as with all the No Idea stuff. So VAR, and that's his own story that hopefully someday he'll be able to tell in whatever medium he's comfortable with. But he had started the magazine in, I think, 85 or 86 with his buddy Ken, and they did it together for the first 5 years. But the stress face was definitely a VAR doodle. He always, like an artist, I don't know if he would refer to himself as that, but always like a tinkerer, always kind of drawing stuff. A lot of the logo stuff he hand drew, a lot of, the different iterations of how No Idea was presented. But by the time that I had met VAR, the stress face was very much in circulation, as you saw on like the Spoke records, the Radon records, the Bombshell 7-inch, all the things that were permeating when I first came to Gainesville. But yeah, he did a really good job of kind of wrapping that into the visual side and the presentation of it. And I think, No Idea always kind of had this different vibe, right? It wasn't so serious, right? A lot of the armadillo illustrations were pretty, interesting to say the least. And so I think that really lent itself, and it had a charm that was a little bit different from a lot of the other labels that were being active at the time. And as an extension of that, I mean, so many things spun out of it. One of the things that happened was someone that we had met in Tire From Now On touring in the 90s was Tony Weinbender. Tony was living in Roanoke, Virginia, and he had done a couple shows for us on tours. And we had always really gotten along with him. And he ended up coming down with his band and playing Gainesville. And he really connected with Gainesville, right? He really just liked to hear. And he connected not only with Tire From Now On, but mostly with Less Than Jake and with Hot Water Music. And so he ended up roading for Less Than Jake on the Warped Tour in the late 90s. And that really cemented, okay. And by that point, Vinny was starting Fuel by Ramen, which, was really starting to be a vehicle for them. And so Tony relocated to Gainesville, and VAR ended up hiring him to do some PR work and kind of help just get the word out, because Tony's really good at just being active, right? How else to put it? But Tony had always been enamored with big festivals, and so that was something that he really wanted to bring to Gainesville. And so while he was working at No Idea, that's when he started doing the fest. And definitely Tony's idea from the get, right? It was his baby.
Is there a difference between what was Gainesville Fest and what became the fest?
Yeah. So there was a Gainesville Fest. I think that happened 3 times. And that was done by people that didn't live in Gainesville. I believe the guy's name was Alex, and I can't remember the other guy's name. One of them was from Orlando. One of them was from Miami. I didn't know them. And they wanted a central place in Florida to do a fest. And so and they called it Gainesville Fest. And they did it for 2 years. They did it at the YMCA camp. And it was this kind of old decommissioned YMCA camp in the middle of the prairie. And you could kind of go buck wild. And they had this little lodge that the bands would play in. But there was like rolling hills with people playing kickball and tag and just being crazy out there.
Campground, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the last year they tried to do it in town, and that's when the Converge thing happened and all like the big fight, and that ended unceremoniously. I'll just put it that way. But I personally had nothing to do with that. Assholeparade played one of them. It was definitely cool. It was, I think, interesting because it was such outsider energy, which I thought was neat, but just different. There wasn't a lot of Gainesville participation in those, which is not good or bad, just interesting. And so the fact that they used Gainesville Fest, I always thought was interesting because none of them were from here, but they did it. People loved it, but it was only 3 years. And so when Tony started, that's why he called it The Fest. I always wanted him to have a name for it, but he couldn't be bothered. And so, but that really grew out of the No Idea incubator. Not that No Idea had much to do with it per se, just that he was around all that energy, and everyone was kind of really encouraging him. And it kind of ties in because, the first couple of years that Tony was doing the fest, all the registration would be done at Wayward Council. No Idea would have a flea market sale at No Idea as part of the fest. And it was like a really big aspect of it in that first 10 years. And so I think that, again, if you think about coming home from Europe in 99 and being so kind of filled with enthusiasm for, what the Gainesville scene is producing, then a few years later, Tony starts doing this fest, and then people start, not that I well, I wasn't meeting people where they were. Now they were coming to us. And it really was this kind of celebration of Gainesville, right? And the Gainesville Fest did a great job of putting on a music festival. And the bands they brought were awesome. And the way they did it was pretty incredible. But it could have been done anywhere, I think. The fest has always been really central to Gainesville itself. The town, the people that are active here, kind of the roots of what's happening. That's the way I always saw it. Granted, there's a lot more that happens in Gainesville than the fest, right? The fest doesn't incorporate everything. But I think the way that Tony really celebrates the town, and I mean, obviously I had the perspective of being 2 feet away the whole time. So, my admiration for it is colored. I'll be the first to say I'm biased and a fan. But I always thought he did such a wonderful job of infusing his events with the city and with the people that are from here. And so that was, again, just another way for me to see how important what was going on here was to so many people and still is. And I think that I think has just been, I mean, the fact that this is the 23rd fest coming up in a couple weeks.
It's crazy how many there have been. And when you look at them holistically, are there any in particular that stand out to you where you got to play with one of the bands that you were in?
I mean, I feel so lucky. I just have to say that. And not because I'm any more talented than anyone else or have more to offer, just right place at the right time, and I'll be the first to kind of own that. But yeah, I mean, I played, especially in those early years, Fest 3 especially. So I was in a band kind of parallel with Assholeparade called True North that did a lot of touring. It was 2 of the guys from Palatka and Dave from 12 Hour Return, and we had all become friends. And we made this band as the Hardback was winding down as well. And we had been touring a lot in the early 2000s. And Fest 3 was in 2004. And True North was on tour with the Blood Brothers and Against Me. And we had been gone for 2 months. And when I came back, Fest was the third to last show of the tour. Like the whole tour rolled through and played Fest. But I had 4 other bands at the time that I played in. And so all 5 bands played that one day of Fest. It was awesome.
Wow.
And it was like, and it was crazy because I hadn't seen any of the other 4 bands for 5 weeks because I had been on tour. So no practice, no anything. I didn't even have a cell phone at this point. It was just like
That's
little
wild,
touch-ins.
Matt.
Yeah, but I did it, and it was great. So Strikeforce played, Stress Face played, which was the No Idea band.
Right.
At some point, I got it in my mind that because we all worked at No Idea, we had to have a band, and of course, it had to be called Stress Face. So it was me and Var and Replay, John Marburger, and Ryan, and we basically started to play. We played Fest 1. That was our first show, and we played every fest until I think Fest 19. And so Stress Face played, True North played, Assholeparade played, Strikeforce Diablo played, and then I did this is kind of silly, but as we were talking about earlier, bands cancel, things don't work out. Years and years ago in the 90s, this band called Sparkmarker had come through Gainesville, fantastic band from Vancouver.
Yeah,
Vancouver. They were awesome. Var put on a show for them in Undertow at a house, and it was an amazing show. I was lucky enough to see the show, and they were great. And after Sparkmarker, Ryan, who was the singer in Sparkmarker, did a band called Dead Sure, and Var put out a record for them. That Fest 4, they were supposed to play, and I actually hadn't seen Ryan since then. But something happened with his band, and he was the only person that made it. So he's there, and he's like determined to do this Dead Sure set. And I had seen him I'm just getting there. I roll in Friday night and like late, and Saturday is the day I play all these shows. And I see him Friday night, and we just start talking, and he's kind of telling me yeah, the band didn't. So I'm just going to do a karaoke. It's like, I got backing tracks and I'm just going to sing. And I'm like, dude, what if I put a band together and we were your backing band? He's like, you're going to learn our songs? I was like, no. Still play the music. We're just going to get up there with instruments and just pretend to be your band. And he's like, okay. And so I played guitar. Roy from Lucero played drums, and Gretchen, who does Red Onion screen printing from Tampa, she played the bass, and then Ryan sang. And so we pretended to be Dead Sure, and that was the fifth band I was in that day. It was so fun, so silly, but like, just at that time, that was the kind of energy that was flowing around. And so that day was so crazy because I could only be places for like very specific amounts of time. I'm running around with a bass or a guitar. It was
When that was
really,
all
really
done,
fun.
what did you do? Did you just go home and just crash? Like, what happens after that
I
type of
just had so
day?
much energy. I just was like vibing on all
Wow.
levels. I ended up staying up until like 4 a.m. that night, freaking out. And then we all went and played in Orlando at the social the next night as part of the tour. It was like crazy. We dressed up like we got these beer bottle costumes and played as a 4 pack. I don't know, stupid. But at that point in my life, it was just music, music, and more music. So I was selling, working at No Idea, playing a million bands, helping run Wayward. That was just kind of what I was doing,
Yeah.
and Fest was like, what an amazing vehicle. So, I mean, for years, I had the record for the most amount of sets played. I think that's been overtaken now because it's so much bigger now and so many more people are involved. But that was me the first couple of years, just, always at least three, sometimes five, sometimes
Yeah.
six, like just jumping in, just,
That is
loving it. Just
wild, Matt. One of the bands you did mention, though, that I just want to talk a little bit more about was True North.
so, Palaka and 12 Hour Turn had gone on tour together, and Dave and Ryan, especially, were really close. And Ryan and I were friends from before he joined Palaka when he was still in Hope Springs Eternal in Daytona. And we had always talked about playing music. And so the band just kind of grew out of that. And Mark and Ryan were really close. And so that's how it started. And at first, Dave would drive over from St. Augustine or from Jacksonville. He was living in, and he would drive over for practice, like hour and a half each way. Just get after it. It was a lot of commitment. At some point, he ended up living here. I think from 2000 to 2002, he lived in Gainesville, so that made it easier. But then he ended up moving again, and so he did a lot of commuting to really make that work, and I give it to him for that. But yeah, we were really active from we started playing in I think '99, and we toured pretty consistently until about 2006, and we went all over. I mean, we it was an interesting band because we had so many different kinds of friends, and so we in that era, we toured with everybody from the Red Scare to Orchid to, you know, the band we toured with the most was that band, the Blood Brothers, who we ended up befriending on their first tour, and we just really hit it off. And then they just took off like a rocket and really just took us on tour, really, and which was so gracious of them. But we toured with them 4 times nationally, plus tons of smaller regional acts, and so we got to go everywhere, right? And it was super fun. We had a very disastrous tour of Europe that has many, many stories that would destroy this podcast.
What's a good one you can just share?
Uh, my favorite one of the whole story needs a little bit of setup, but I'll try to be brief. So we were flying out of Miami to go to Europe. That the tour it was cheaper for us to buy flights from Miami to the Netherlands than Orlando. So we drive down to we just put out our record. I think the second one, somewhat similar. And we drive down, we're gonna play a show at Churchill's, right? And then we're gonna fly out the next day. And we're with our friends at Faya. So I'm convincing all these guys, let's go to South Beach. It's going to be awesome, right? So during the day of the show, so we go to South Beach and we park in this municipal lot and we go to some trash bar, whatever. I can't even remember. We ended up messing around on the beach, just kind of living it up, right? Like, we're going to Europe tomorrow. This is going to be amazing. When we get back to the van, somebody had broken into our van and they had stolen all of our bags. So all of our passports, all of our money, all of our merch, all of Ryan's clothing was gone. And so we're like, what are we going to do? And I mean, the tour is starting 2 days from then. And it's like, we're flying over the next day and then the tour starts. And it's like, what we should have done was just cancel the tour. That would have been the smart thing. Like, this, whatever, bad luck. But that's not what we did.
There wouldn't be a story if that's what you did.
There's way too many stories, but I'll make this quick. Miami is one of the 3 places in America that you can get a passport in a matter of hours. So you can expedite it, pay money to get it in 2 hours. So we went to the federal building and we paid the $250 each, so now we're $1,000 in the hole, which is already ridiculous. So we get these passports, we make our flight to get over to Europe, and then we get there. But remember that Ryan has no clothing, right? Like, all his clothes were stolen. And the tour was happening in March, and so it was cold over there. And so word had started to get out. The guy that booked the tour had kind of told everybody what happened. And so people were bringing us clothing for Ryan, but it never fit him. And so everything that he had was either really baggy or too small. And he kind of looked funny because invariably he was always wearing things that were too tight or whatever. So one of the early swings was we went to Norway. And so we took the ferry from Aalborg in Denmark to Oslo, pretty standard route. And by this point, the EU exists, but Norway is not in the EU at this point. And so we get off the ferry and our van gets pulled over for inspection. And they pull us into this garage, and the guy, the border officer, was just convinced that we were smuggling something into Norway. And so they bring us into this like garage. And so in order to try to break us, right, they lined us all up in this garage and they started just yelling at us, "What are you bringing into this country?" And we're like, "Nothing." And they kept pointing at Travis because he had this kind of long beard. He just kind of looked hippie-ish, but he's sober, doesn't do any drugs. And he just was constantly befuddled, and they were convinced that he was some kind of mastermind, which he wasn't. And then Ryan was wearing one of Mark's jackets by this point, which was too small. And it was one of Mark's favorite jackets. And so we're all 6 of us standing in this line, and he's trying to like pat us down. And he's like, "Lift up your arms." And Ryan's like, "I can't. Can I take the jacket off first?" And he's like, "No, lift up your arms." And he's like, "Please don't make me lift up the arms." Lift up your arms. He lifts up the arms and it just rips. And then Mark he starts going off. He's like, "That's my favorite jacket. What's wrong with you?" And then we start infighting. And so the guy starts getting really frustrated. And so he takes Ryan and Travis and puts them in a room, and he takes Mark and Dave and puts them in a room. And then me and Ika are just standing in the garage, and they have these 2 rooms. And he's this kind of giant Norwegian guy who's just screaming at us the whole time. And then he has this like female officer that's with him who's not really saying anything. And so we're sitting there and we hear them in the room with Mark and Dave. And he's convinced now that Mark is one of the kingpins. And so the line of questioning keeps involving, he keeps saying the word sack. He's like, "Where is your sack? Do you hold your sack? Do you always have your hands on your sack? Do you ever leave your sack somewhere?" And so I can't help it. I'm just laughing because it's every sack joke ever. And Ika's like, going like she's just like so confused as to why we keep messing with this guy. And so the best part of the whole story to me is because he's yelling so we can hear all this stuff. So he's trying to get us to tell different versions of the story. And so after the sack, he comes storming out of the room because he doesn't get a response he likes. And I'm standing there like laughing. And I just look at him and I'm like, "You're going to ask me about my sack?" And he looks at me, and there just happened to be like a little boom box that he had like sitting on a table. And I guess he had convinced himself that if I couldn't hear, that he'd be better off. So he hits play, and and it's Janet Jackson, Rhythm Nation, and he turned it on as loud as possible. And I'm just sitting there and just in this garage, and I just start doing the like Rhythm Nation dance because I can't help it. And Ika's like freaking out, thinking we're going to jail. And finally, the guy just freaks out and lets us go after probably an hour and a half of just screaming at us because we didn't have anything. And by that point, we were messing with each other as much as we were messing with him. And so he was just so over it. But that kind of stuff kept happening on that tour, like over and over and over. There's another story where Dave almost dies, and I have to negotiate with a very disappointed Swiss hospital to release him. It goes on and on and on. It was definitely the tour that shouldn't have happened, but
It sounds
great,
like
great fun anyway.
some real moments of that could have been something else.
Yeah, but I mean, what a great group of people, and we got to tour and play so many cool shows with great bands, big shows, small shows, and we were really active, for the time we were together.
Was that the last time you were in Europe, though, was with True North?
No. So that was 2004. So Assholeparade went back in 2007 and in 2009. 2009 was the last time I was in Europe. Have talked on and off about going back. Just it seems a little bit far away right now. We'll see. Offers still come, which is amazing. It's more, we've just been really doing domestic stuff with AP. So with AP, we just have never really stopped. We've switched bass players a few times. In 2000, that day that I played with the 5 bands at Fest, that was the last show we played with Brian Johnson, who was the original guitar player. And then that's when Tony joined. Tony, also from Miami, he was in a bunch of Miami bands, and he had moved to Gainesville. He had grown up with Rick Smith, the Smith brothers, and Jonathan Nunez, and he was in Adora Meridia, that kind of era of Miami bands. And so he ends up joining the band. He's been in the band since 2004. So that really, once we got that lineup together, to me, really solidified that productivity. And we were super active for another 7 years or so, touring a lot, putting out records. And then that kind of culminated in 2011. We went to Japan, and that was really kind of a good bookmark, right? So after we came back from Japan, it just kind of slowed down.
Was that your first time over in Japan?
Mm-hmm. The only time I've been. Fantastic tour. What a unique experience. Everything that I ever wanted and more. I mean, saw so many incredible bands, so many incredible venues. The people I thought were so magical. It was similar to Europe in the sense that the scene was so much older. Everyone that went to the shows, I was considered young, being 40, right? Which was mind-blowing. So that part was so cool to me that it was a great time in my life to have it be reinforced that you could stay committed to this kind of culture past your youth, really seeing people that were lifers. And that's one of the things that's really helped sustain me is, in being in Europe and being in Japan, where a lot of the underground culture, it's a lifestyle, not a fad. And so that's something that I really took to heart. And one of the things that still, enamors me to still try to be as active as I can be today.
And speaking about just bands and this activity and what have you, one of the bands that came back was Strikeforce Diablo. And I know there was some stuff that was issued by Ashtray Monument, and
Yeah,
you all played MonuFest as well. So there was a reunion of sorts. So how did
yeah.
you all decide to come back and do it again?
I mean, it's funny because none of the bands, when we first started talking, one of the things that I had mentioned was I never really considered myself a musician per se. I just love being in bands. I love creating with people, and I love the energy that I get in that dynamic. And because of that, a lot of the bands I ended up being in never really break up. So Strikeforce, Kevin and Drew are such dear friends of mine. In my mind, that band would never break up. We're not active, obviously, but any chance that we can to connect and give purpose to our hanging out, we'll jump at it. And so Drew from Ashtray Monument approached us about organizing all of the early stuff onto one record because it had been a CD, a split 7-inch here, a comp track. And so he wanted all of that kind of pre-album stuff on one thing. And we were all for it. And we just figured, hey, if we're going to go through this, let's play, MonuFest. And so it was awesome. So fun. I mean, as good as it ever was for me. We got to play a show in Gainesville too. Big fun. Just, I love those guys. I would play with them tomorrow. Like we've written so many songs that we've never put out. That's almost every band I've been in. Assholeparade has written probably 5 records we've never put out. True North, so much music unrequited. And I think that for me personally, just because I'm a common thread in a lot of these, that just stems from I enjoy just the band part more than the artistry, I guess. That's just being part of the culture, being part of the time, connecting with people and creating with people. That means more to me than anything. And I love the records. I love documenting. I love that I have some. I could have more if I was more motivated in that way. It's never been the important part for me.
Yeah. But
It's
to your point though, that is something that with all these different projects, and again, there's a lot, there is this documentation that
yeah,
the majority of them do have something, whether it was a
yeah,
demo cassette, a 7-inch, an LP,
yeah,
whatever it is. So you have maintained that consistency because, again, common thread in all these different bands and projects you've been a part of. And there's even more that we haven't even talked about yet where you're
yeah,
still putting
yeah.
out physical music.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I mean, again, so fortunate to have been creating with people that people have interest in. And I think, yeah, I've been on, I think 35 different records at this point, maybe more, something like that.
Who's
And
counting at this point?
I don't know. I mean, it's awesome, right?
It
And
is.
everything from starting. My first vinyl was Tire From Now On, right? My first demo was really Utility because my high school band I never got to record with. We just played shows, and just all the way through from Worlds to Bite Marks to True North to Stress Face to just all the projects I've been lucky enough to be a part of. It's been great. I think living in Gainesville and kind of having a consistency to it makes it easier for people to find the things that I'm a part of. I think that I definitely have never had a long period of inactivity in terms of pumping things out. And so I think that is one of the reasons I've been lucky enough to have documented so much of the things that I've done. And I have so many long-term friendships with people all over the state and really all over the country and the world. And so I am fortunate, so fortunate, and I don't take it for granted to have that kind of outlet if the time is right. Like I have 2 current bands that have started in the last year or so, and one of them, Rubes, we just played last night, and we have a record coming out on Tiger pretty soon. I'm looking forward to that, and so
I feel like with a band like that, though, too, I feel like some of the more later bands, the sound can be a bit more aggressive in some respects.
Yeah, yes. So a lot of my peers kind of went in a different direction. They got more, either they went country, that was a big wave here, or they went, rock and roll, which I appreciate. I really like too. I wanted to get more acerbic as I got older. I wanted to get harder for a casual person to be interested in what I was doing. I wanted it to be more of a choice. That's just ultimately where my taste kind of wandered to, right? And yeah, so a lot of the bands I've been doing in the last 10 years have been much more caustic. I mean, all of my time in Assholeparade definitely honed my appreciation for that end of the spectrum. And I think plus I really appreciate the fact that you can't casually listen to the music I've been creating lately. You kind of have to be in or you're out.
I think also the live shows have a different vibe than when you
Oh
may
yeah.
just be listening to the music that was recorded in a studio. So it's so wonderful though, just to hear that there is no end in sight from what I can tell.
No, I mean, this fest, so fest up coming up at the end of the month. I'm playing with three bands, Future Forms and Rubes and Assholeparade. Super excited. We're finishing up a new Assholeparade record because we've been joking that the band's been going for 30 years. We have one LP. It's kind of embarrassing. So we're going to make another LP. We've written hundreds of songs and we're just going to make one more LP no matter what. Tony and I are committed to it just to document, we've let it go way too long. And so we're going to do that. And yeah, the hardest part now is the fact that, being older, you do find yourself in interesting situations where you're just, you do it because you love it. And that's something that I learned from Wayward, and they're no longer my peers in the age respect, but they're peers in the interest and a love for the medium respect. And so that's been a shift, being in a room with people like everybody's 20, 30 years younger than you. That's definitely, something you got to get used to, but it's worth it for me, and I know where the lines are, I try to be respectful and don't try to get off my lawn anybody or anything like that. Just thinking about the way that I interacted with, the people that came before me. I want to try to provide positive, interactions,
Right.
just to, and also not like direct people in one way or the other, just, hey, whatever you're into. And so when I am around younger people, really trying to let them, supply the energy, and then I just try to do what I can to help, so.
When you get those grays, Matt, that's wisdom coming out. You got to share that with the youth. So
Yeah, I have no inhibition about letting people know things, but I really try not to inhibit other people being a part of it.
sure.
Just again, just knowing that all of the things I've been so lucky to be a part of, I don't think inherently it was something I was doing. I just happened to be there. And if I can share that kind of testimony with anyone, that it is all possible, it is all true, it is all amazing, that's all I really want to do. I have always been convinced that if more people were lucky enough to see the things that I've seen, I think they would have a different outlook.
Oh, totally. I mean, most people don't even leave their own town. So,
Yeah.
the fact that you've traveled the world
Yeah.
and different time zones and you've met so many different people, so many different bands, so many different walks of life, you've seen so much in your journey that most people don't typically live anything close to that.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think it's just so wonderful to hear your story, and it's been great getting a chance to have you on to tell it, Matt. So as we get ready to close things out, I would love to give you the last word. Any final thoughts you'd like to share to the folks out there, both watching and listening to this episode? The floor is yours to take us home.
I mean, I think just more of what we've been touching on in the conversation. You know, I think I will be forever indebted to the people that gave me the grace to take me under their wing and show me a different way, that I feel like I've been trying to pay that back, you know, the rest of the time that I've been as active as I can be. And I think that one thing that's such a big part of that kind of musical kind of context is that it is linear. And I want to respect that, and that the fact that people can contribute at any point and mean as much as anyone on that timeline. You know, I feel like no one is more impactful than anyone else. It's just when you get your chance to make your mark. And I feel too that never stop. You don't have to kind of phase out. You just find different ways to participate, even if you're just encouraging people and, you know, helping where you can. You don't have to be going to every show or writing zines or playing in bands. There's so many ways to organize and contribute. And the thing that the underground music culture has showed me is that you can really define the way that you want to contribute, the way that you feel comfortable with, and you're just as important. And so that's something I just want to reinforce every chance I can.